let's go ahead and start. I guess perhaps a good idea would be for everyone to introduce themselves. I'm John Higdon, the Mayor Matthews, and I guess when we have the elected officials go first. Larry?
Larry Whitley, Commissioner Matthews.
John?
Yeah, Commissioner Matthews, local architect.
Mr. Miller?
Commissioner Matthews in my 7th term.
Renee?
Commissioner Matthews in my 1st term.
And I think Ken is driving, so he can't speak, but Ken is in his 1st term. He also holds a distinction, I believe, of being the youngest official in North Carolina. I basically have socks older than him.
And he's doing a fine job.
He is. And Mr. Bland, Commissioner Bland, will be joining us momentarily, and we have some staff members. Tanya, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Tanya McGovern, HR Director.
And we all know Lori.
Tanya is going to be hosting the meeting after I get Dave in, just so you know. So if you need any technical issues, ask her.
Okay. Mr. Pettigrew, if you want to go ahead and lead off. Introduce yourself, I guess.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. My name is True Pettigrew, and I am the founder and president of True Access. And my partner, Tony, and I are extremely excited to be sharing with you all tonight. So thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we can go ahead and start.
All right. And I think that's a great segue in introducing who we are. And so I'm going to take a second to share my screen with you all, and hopefully you all can see that. And what you all can see that, okay, good. What Chief Godwin and I like to do is when we have these conversations, and we do consider it a discussion, a conversation. And so we want to set the stage by encouraging you all to be active participants in this discussion. I know oftentimes these sessions are positioned as trainings, and we have a lot of experience and expertise in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we view this as more of a discussion. And so we want to encourage you all to participate in this discussion tonight. That's when we will all get the most out of it, by our willingness to share, listen, and learn with and from one another. As I said, Chief and I have a lot of experience and expertise, but neither of us proclaim to have all the answers, and no one of us has all the answers. We are best served when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion by being inclusive and hearing and sharing the diverse perspectives that we all have, and leveraging our collective life experience and our collective intelligence. And we like to start off in talking about who we are. You know a little bit about what we do, chiefs, right? And I am a speaker and a community bridge builder. And I believe that a lot of the reason that we experience a lot of the diversity challenges that we experience in our society, we experience a lot of the division. And we all have seen how there has been so much division plaguing our nation over these past couple of years. And there are some studies that suggest we are at a time when we are the most divided in America since the Civil War, particularly across racial and political lines. And so that division is impacting us all in some shape or form. And it is my belief that part of the reason we're experiencing so much division is because we don't take the time to get to know others, and whoever others may be to us, to really get to know people on a human level, who they are. We oftentimes assess, judge, and stereotype people by their identity diversity, which is what they look like, what we see. We see a white male, we see a black male, we see a Hispanic female, we see a baby boomer, a millennial. We stereotype people by what we see, or even by what they do. An elected official, a politician, a police officer, a lawyer, whatever the case may be. But we don't take the time to get to know who people are on a human level. So Chief and I like to just make sure people know who we are. And this picture, I believe, does a good job of that. You see there me, and next to me is my beautiful wife, Tamika, of 19 years, and our young prince, Austin. He'll be 9 years old this month. And we're with Chief and his family and his wife and his son. But I view everyone in this photograph as a family member. we're one big happy family. And we'll share a little bit more about story. And there was a time when I would not believe that I would be able to say that the other gentleman in this picture, the man that's on this screen with me tonight, Chief Godwin, is one of the closest people to me on this planet. And there was a time, based on my life experiences, where I would not have believed I would consider a white male police officer from the South one of the closest people to me on the planet. He's my brother, and he knows I'd do anything for him. Love him like cook food, right? And we were able to establish this bond and this connection and this brotherhood. And I don't want to oversimplify it, but I will say simply because we took the time to get to know each other. So this is who we are. We're brothers, we're friends, we're fathers, we're husbands, we're sons, we're leaders. And so you'll learn a lot about what we do, but it's important that you know who we are, because once we get to know who people are on a human level, we soon realize that there's so much more that connects us than we should ever allow to separate us. And Chief, I'll give you the opportunity to introduce your beautiful family, my nephew, my sister, and talk a little bit more about who you are.
Yeah, thanks, True. And yes, as True pointed out, this is such a good, just an illustration of who we are, right? My wife Shannon is seated next to me, and my youngest son Colton, who is 10 years old now. This was several years ago, so he was much smaller then, and Austin is too. Austin's a heck of a lot bigger now than he was when that picture was taken. But that's who we are, and I think particularly seeing those two young men in that picture, because that is what really drives True and I. The desire to create a better community, to create a better society, so that those two young men can grow up in a better place. Right, those two young men and young men and young women, all over. We want to create a better world, if you will, and so that is what motivates us. That's what drives us. I've been in law enforcement for over 30 years, and while I love what I do, I was really fortunate about 7 years ago to discover my passion, which is this work. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. But those two young men especially are good illustrations for why we do what we do. So that's what I would add, True, just to reiterate what you said.
No, thanks, TG. And as we get into this discussion, as I mentioned before, we want to view it as a discussion and encourage you to do the same. And I'll stop sharing my screen for a second so that we can just we can see all the faces here and get a chance to have some dialogue with you all, is to get a sense from you as to how you view diversity training, which is how I believe this was positioned. And I ask that because Tony being in law enforcement, and when we first met years ago back in 2014, and once we were able to establish a rapport, I said, hey, I think I can offer a service to the Cary Police Department, which is where Tony was chiefing, and offer some diversity training, some diversity and inclusion training. And he paused and he gave me a look like I had offended him in some way. And I was like, well, what was that a problem? I mean, I thought you and I were on the right track here. I thought we were getting along. And now you say, well, True, I tell you, diversity training when it comes to law enforcement is not often well received. And I was like, well, explain. And he explained to me how law enforcement in that profession viewed diversity training. But I'd be curious to understand that if that same dynamic is true for this group and your experiences and where you've worked professionally in the role and capacity in which you work now as elected officials and just your life experiences and your careers, if you have similar experiences when it comes to diversity training, because this is where we want to include you in the direction that this discussion goes this evening. And TG, I'll ask you to join back in on the conversation and talk a little bit about why you responded to me in the manner in which you did when I suggested diversity training for your department over 7 years ago.
Yeah, well, True, it's one of those things that law enforcement has been doing diversity training for a long time. It's been called different things over the years. but literally probably the better part of 15 years, it's been part of what we call our in-service training requirements as mandated by North Carolina Training Standards. And so the problem is not diversity training in and of itself. To me, the problem has been with the way it's been delivered, right? And it's been, I think it's been very accusatory. It's been very, been a lot of finger pointing. And it just, over time, it became something that kind of turned officers off, right? The concept of the training, just in the way that it was structured and the way it was rolled out and the way it was delivered. And so, that's the content of kind of our original discussion. And that was the challenge that I gave you and that you saw. And that was creating diversity training that wasn't going to come across that way. Right. And so I think that's what we have here. Number one, I take a little bit of issue with training. I don't necessarily see this as training. I think this is a discussion, right? Because I think with training is for you and I to come in and be teaching everybody else on this call something about diversity, right? But I think what we have is an opportunity to learn from each other. Because we all have experiences as it relates to diversity and inclusion. We all have our own life experiences. We've had things we've been through and things that we've done, things that we've seen, things that we've heard, and we can all benefit from that. So to me, training is a little bit of a one-way discussion, whereas I consider this to be very much a conversation, very much a discussion where we're learning from and teaching to each other. And that includes everybody here in this forum. And so that's what the way we like to do this is look at this as a diversity discussion. But as True said, one of the things that we like to do at the very beginning is we like to establish kind of a baseline and try to figure out everybody on this call is coming from different places and more so than normal, right? With most organizations, it's all law enforcement officers, or it's all educators, or it's all town government employees, like we've done here with Town of Matthews. And while you all share the same trait of being commissioners for the Town of Matthews, you do something else in real life. Not that this isn't real life, but you've got another job, right? And I heard somebody say, I believe that they said an architect. Did I hear that right, Mr. Urban? You're Commissioner Urban. You're an architect, and so everybody does something else on top of what you do for the Town of Matthews. And so because of that, you may come at this very different ways, right? And your experiences with diversity training, quote unquote, may be very, very different. And so what I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time here at the very beginning, kind of discussing what that has been. What kind of diversity training have you had? And when we think about the diversity training you've had, what is it that has worked, right? Because we'd like to know what works and what has resonated, because when we go through this today, we want to try to build those kinds of things in. But also as important as what worked, what didn't work, right? What kind of turned you off and made you say, you know what, I'm kind of shut down at this point. We want to know what those things are too, because we want to try to not have that happen tonight. And then finally, when you think about, maybe it's not been an experience you have, but if you're going to develop your own diversity training, what kinds of things would you put into it? What would you do if you were building your own? And so that's the kind of the 3-point process that I want to go through in the next few minutes to try to glean from you what your experiences have been. So let's start with what's worked. Well, number one, let me ask this question. Show of hands. Who has had diversity training of some sort in the past? Anybody? Okay, good. Fantastic. So everybody raised their hand. So I wasn't sure how that was going to work because you've all coming from different vocations and occupations. I didn't know whether or not that would be something that you'd had. So that's fantastic. So let's focus on the good. So since everybody's had it, who can share with me some things that they have experienced in diversity training that really worked well or really kind of resonated with you?
Sorry. Can I bring up one point while it's quiet?
Certainly.
Mr. Pettigrew, you mentioned that as you get to know people, you realize, and I've heard Commissioner Whitley say the same thing, as you get to know people, you realize that you have more in common than you have apart or differences. And I'd like to compare that for a moment, please, to our sister city in France. Dwight Eisenhower fought in World War II, and he witnessed in the countryside of France or the countryside of Italy, the civilians had nothing against the Americans, but we were at war, and he started the Sister City program. And we have a sister city in France, and he saw the value in, if a city over there and a city over here get to know each other and they interchange friendship and ideas and dialogue, that they will get to know each other better and there will be less wars. And so that's a small parallel to your if you get to know people. And in my first career, I was a chef, and the diversity in the kitchen when I was younger was Austrian, French, German, Chinese, Spanish, and American. And that's changed with every job through the years to more Latinos, Blacks, and whites. But I got to know all of those cultures pretty well. And in today's world, I'm a affordable housing property manager where I rent homes to Blacks, Latinos, and whites, and there's a balance there. And I don't have it in my heart at all to be prejudiced or to be biased in any way. Because of those experiences.
No, absolutely. No, thanks for sharing that. That was, I think you make an excellent point. And can I ask, do you, the fact that what you do now, and you work with a certain segment of the population, right? I think all, for the most part, what you pointed out was parts of the minority community, right? How much influence do you think your experiences as a chef working with so many different people from different backgrounds, different aspects, how much do you think that played into your ability now to relate to other parts of the community in the job that you do now? Do you think that played into it?
It probably did. I'm born and raised originally in Chicago from the 50s to the 90s. And I just didn't consider where I lived having any real prejudice back then. And my first cassette I ever bought was Al Green. I mean, the Temptations and all that kind of stuff. I didn't have it in my heart or in my friends' talking points that we thought that was all over until we heard Southern Man by Neil Young, which is about prejudice in the South.
Right.
So I hung it up, honestly, but I realize that it's a hot talking point now. It's just not in my heart or brain.
Sure. And Commissioner Miller, if I can challenge you a little bit, I mean, I think you're younger than me, but you are still a man with, let's say, seasoned. You are a seasoned man, right? You've been around for a little bit. Are you sure the first thing you bought was a cassette, or was that an 8-track?
No, I didn't have an 8-track player. It was a cassette, and I'm 65 years old.
Oh, okay. All right. So you didn't have the 8-track. I was just thinking back in my day, maybe the first thing I bought was probably an 8-track. So
it was a 45. That's what Miller bought.
Maybe.
But I think you bring up a good point, right? And I think that one of those things I think can apply to good diversity training, and that is what studies have found is that the way you really kind of relate to others, the best way to relate to others is living life with them, right? To live life alongside of them, whether it's working together, working on projects together, living together, whatever it is, living life with people, right? And I think that in good diversity training, it is a mixture of people, right? And you see diversity in the group, and going through a good diversity training with people that are different than you can help you better associate to the concepts of diversity and inclusion that we're trying to talk about in the training. And I think that the examples that you gave, both with the sister cities and with your personal experiences, are a good example of that, is that we can live life through this next 4 hours with a group of people that are diverse, and we can get things out of it because of that diversity.
That's right.
So, no, excellent point. Thank you for kicking us off in such a strong way there, Commissioner Miller.
Thank you.
Who else? Who else has had positive experience?
I'd like to throw in a few comments. I grew up until age 12 in Strongsville, Ohio, which is at the time a very rural suburb of Cleveland. Even though it was near Cleveland, it was about 99.9% white rural folks. And I think there was one black family in our town. So I went through 6th grade there, moved to Charlotte, and attended Quail Hollow and South Mecklenburg High School, which were about 50-50 black and white. So thrown into that melting pot of, and other ethnicities, a few others. But so that was in the 70s. And I've often said that, they would show us these, what we thought were ancient, grainy videos of the civil rights movement, which were actually only about 10 years previous. But we were all like brothers. We were in class together. We played football together. We played sports. I recall very little issues with racism, or that I could perceive. And so I've made the comments now as mayor all these years later, when we've had things like George Floyd and all that. We weren't nearly as done with the civil rights movement as maybe I thought that we were. But I think the best experience for me was just, going to school. After that, I went to NC State, also very diverse. So just getting to know people, sit down, break bread, play sports together, be in clubs together, so became very, very good friends with people of all races. And I think that was the best thing. I think prejudice is born out of ignorance, just fearing the unknown. So, when you're, that's why the integration of the schools was such a good thing, that everybody got to know each other and say, hey, as someone said earlier, you're not as different from me as I thought you might be. We're very similar. We just have different pigmentation in our skin.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And let me start with Go Pack, class of 90 right here. Go
Right.
Pack. So we can relate to one another on that. But no, really good point. And again, I think it's those experiences of living life, right, with people that were different than you, right, and that's what made all the difference, and that's what made you see things a certain way. And it's funny when you said that, seeing the films back in school of the civil rights movement, and the grainy films and feeling like that was a long time ago, and the irony of the fact that it wasn't that much earlier than when you were sitting there watching the film, right?
Yeah, it was like 1975, and I'm watching films from '68. I'm thinking, wow, that was 40 years ago. No, that was not long ago at all.
Yeah, I mean, even today, it wasn't that long ago. So back then, it really wasn't that long ago. So, no, excellent point. Excellent point.
I think, Renee, you had a comment or want to join the conversation?
We were asked about diversity training that had a positive impact. And, I've done several different training courses, but one of the most recent ones was a somatic response workshop. And that one was probably the most positive experience, because it teaches you to go outside of the mind, which in our rational mind, we all feel like maybe racism isn't a big problem and diversity is something that is easy to accept, in the mind, but somatic response is teaching you to feel your body and see how you respond to everyday interactions and put emotional names to it so that you can understand the process. So that one was something that I really appreciated.
Gotcha. And so I'm not familiar with the somatic response, but it sounds like it's about just being about awareness, right? Just being aware of how you're processing things, how you're feeling things. Is that accurate?
Yeah. And as you talk through things, how, what ticks we each have and how you can notice that and learn to work on yourself more.
Gotcha. And so there were I guess there were exercises in that training that kind of put you in that place and helped you to experience that somatic response. Is that accurate?
Not necessarily. We just kind of talked about it, looked at certain tools like the emotions wheel and things like that, and noticed just as a group, as the more we talked, the more you could recognize within yourself. It was more natural than putting yourself into a difficult situation. It was mediator led, and it was really interesting.
Gotcha. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate that. Anybody else have positive experiences with, Commissioner McCool?
Sorry I was late, everyone. I made a scheduling error, but I'm here now. So our board did a similar diversity thing in November, and that kind of brought on some more light to me. And I'm a huge history nerd, and so it kind of set off this almost crusade for me of learning more about our history so I can kind of see where we're going. And so, ever since that, I've spent a lot of time reading books, looking into history, and having that has actually created a perspective that I didn't have before of, struggles that others have and perspectives that, myself being, may not have experienced. And I spent a lot of time reading about Thurgood Marshall, the Supreme Court justice who was the first African American on the Supreme Court, and reading about his story and his response to when he became appointed to that position, and how meaningful that was to not only him but to the African American community. So it's kind of, that was a really positive experience as it got me on this journey of learning more. And I think, as the mayor said, the more you learn, the less ignorant you'll be, and, you can kind of move forward from that.
No, excellent. And thanks for sharing that. And I think you use a term that oftentimes when people think of it, they think of it in a very negative way, right? You said ignorant. The less ignorant you will be. Right. But ignorant doesn't necessarily mean anything bad. It just means you're not aware. You don't know. Right. And there's so many things that we just simply don't know, even to the extent that we don't know what we don't know. Right. We got no idea what those things are. And so, taking the opportunity to get educated, to learn history. Right. Like the example that you gave with Thurgood Marshall. But even beyond that, right, just taking the opportunity to learn from others whose experiences may have been very, very different than yours, right? So it doesn't have to be anything there's going to be a book about. It might just be, listening to Tony's experience and where Tony came from. And I assure you, nobody's going to write a book about that, right? I'm not that interesting, but I've got experiences. And when I share those experiences, it very well may be different than your experiences. And so we can learn from others. We can learn from history and historical perspective. Absolutely. But we can also just learn from each other's personal experiences. And that's what's so rich about having these discussions together. Right. And being in a room together and engaging in that conversation is what makes it, to me, really powerful, is that we have the chance to learn from each other. So excellent point. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else on the good side? Yes, Commissioner Whitley.
Yeah, I come from a different background, as you well can see. I attended North Carolina State A&T University in Greensboro, which is a predominantly black college back in 1970. But once I graduated from there, I went to North Carolina High Patrol. I graduated in December the 18th, 74. And I was in patrol school January the 4th of 75. So 2 weeks later, I only had a 2 weeks break from college to there. But in the patrol, I experienced racism back in that time. I was the 18th black trooper hired in the state of North Carolina. And it was 3 blacks in that class out of 39. It was really rough, but I experienced it. But later on, as I got promoted in the highway patrol, we were trying to get our standards upgraded, and so we had a diversity training through the highway patrol. And I can tell you, being the North Carolina Highway Patrol was all white male organization, and it was really tough for them to accept diversity. Like you were saying, Chief, they didn't want to hear nothing about no diversity. And I mean, it was really, we had to bring in an outside agent to go around, and at that time it was like 1,800 troopers employed, and everyone went through, but it was really tough. But it was real good training, and it taught. And I think I was a first sergeant when I went through that. But it taught all leaders how to make sure that you had diversity with women, and so white women or women on the highway patrol had as much hard time as blacks coming on the patrol, because they just didn't feel like blacks were supposed to be there, and even more, they did not feel like women should be the state troopers. But the training there helped me. And then once I retired, and with the church, we've had my church partner with another church, United Methodist here in Matthews, and the 2 churches took a diversity training together as well too. And I think this was our 3rd training as a commissioner. I became a commissioner 5 years ago in 2016. And the first commissioner that reached out to me and asked me out for breakfast was the mayor. And he was a commissioner at that time, and we met at Americana, and I didn't know who he was. He said, "Well, you won't have no problem recognizing me. I'm about 6'5" and white-headed." So when he came in, I knew exactly who he was. But he offered an olive branch to me coming onto the commissioners. And Chief and True, I was the first African-American commissioner to sit on the board of Matthews in 136 years back then, 5 years ago. So now 141 years, but I've been on 5 years and working. That blew my mind. That really blew my mind that the town of Matthews never had any black representation, taxation without representation. And so, but in any event, my campaign when I ran was on equality and affordable homes. My church is in the community called Crestdale Community. Crestdale Community is one of the oldest African-American community in the state of North Carolina. It's great heritage. And I'm very proud, and the town has really embraced us. And now just finished Crestdale Heritage Trail, which has just opened up so much to come through the community. It's connectivity for the black community with the town. And so, but those are some positive things that I have brought to this town, and there's still a lot of work to do, True and Chief, as we continue, especially in this day for a black man. I think I told the town a couple of Saturdays ago, Black America is mad as hell. We were mad before we had the verdict in with George Floyd, but then it was short-lived with all the other shootings of black in America and equality, and we still push for equality. Now I can tell you, I've been the only black on the town for 5 years, but I tell you too, and not that I'm not close to all the other commissioners, but the 2 commissioners really reached out, and I consider a really good friend because we broke bread together. They have sat at my table over at the church many times as Miller and John Higdon. And I really feel close. As a matter of fact, I feel so close to Miller. He asked me to marry him and his wife. And I I'm honored that I married and was able to do that ceremony. But John and his mom and dad, they family, they've been to my church and broke bread with me many times, and along with Renee and Ken. They're young, but they ain't ate our good food over at Mount Moriah because of the pandemic. But when we get back, we will. But I really believe that in order to conquer or to bridge this gap, you got to be relationships, you got to be friendship, and you got to break bread together. And when you break bread together, as I told Chief, I was born in Zebulon, which is about 20 miles from where he was, Chief, and we were farmers. And I remember my mom and dad was big on hospitality and inviting people to your home and breaking bread together and get to know you. And I believe that. That's carried over to me as a pastor of my church, that we break bread together. And once you break bread and put your feet on the same table, it's a different. And I really feel special that we can do that. I really missed that during this pandemic. But I know that the town of Matthews is better today than we were yesterday, but we still have work to do.
Thanks, Commissioner. That was that was a lot, right? That was you said a lot, and I can imagine coming into the Highway Patrol in 1974. You had to be literally one of the very first African Americans in the Highway Patrol. I know Colonel Richard Holden, I believe, if I remember correctly, started in like '69. So just 5 years before you got there, right? And I'm sure there weren't a whole lot of African Americans in those 5 years before you arrived.
Richard recruited me. He came to A&T. He's a graduate from A&T as well too, but he recruited me from A&T in March of '74. That's how I got on. But we grew up together.
Right.
He was from Wendell and I was from Zebulon.
Yep. Well, I can imagine. I can imagine what that was like. I've had the good fortune of Colonel Holden lived in Cary, as well as the recently retired Colonel McNeil. Glenn McNeil still lives in Cary. And so I've had the good fortune of spending quite a bit of time talking to both of those men and hearing some of the stories about their experiences. And so I can somewhat understand kind of what your story is probably like based on the stories that I've heard from them and the conversations I've had with them. And so the fact that both of them, became colonels, rose to the highest level in the organization, I think speaks a lot about who they are, number one, first and foremost. But number two, I think it does indicate how the patrol has changed over a relatively short period of time, right? Because the Highway Patrol's been around since 1939, I believe. 29. And so that's a long time. That's a long time before 1969 when Colonel Holden arrived, right? In 1975 when you arrived. And so that change doesn't come quickly, but when it does, and I think that's a great example of the power of diversity and inclusion. Look at what the patrol and what the state of North Carolina would have missed if they had not have welcomed Colonel Holden and Colonel McNeil and Trooper Whitley into the organization, right? There's so much that would have been missed. So number one, thank you for your service. Thanks for all the years that you put in there at the Highway Patrol. And you said so many things that are just, they hit close to home for me, right? Just breaking bread. We'll talk about how that's kind of fed into mine and True's experiences in our story here in a little bit. But, breaking bread with people, building those relationships, forming those relationships, and what a difference that makes, because it makes all the difference in the world. Absolutely. So thank you for sharing that. So, man, what a great discussion. And we just talked about the good. So I want to switch over real quick because I don't want to leave the bad out there and not at least acknowledge that there's probably been some negative experiences with diversity training. Who has had a negative experience with diversity training? Because we want to identify that too, because we want to make sure we don't replicate that today. Mayor?
Yes, I had an experience, unfortunately, while I was at NC State. Diversity training. I forget the gentleman that gave the training, but you used the word accusatory.
Uh-huh.
It was 100% accusatory. Put forward scenarios. You know, if there was a plane crash and you saw a black gentleman and a white gentleman, who would you go save? Stuff like that, and really confrontational. You know, I'm 6'5". The gentleman that taught this class was bigger than me. He's like a linebacker in the NFL, and he would get up in people's face and scream and had people crying and stuff, and it was absolutely miserable. And people that were black and white that were friends left that experience not liking each other. Like, wow, I didn't know you thought that way. And it was totally not helpful at all. It just created a lot of confrontation and left people on all sides angry. So it wasn't useful in the least. And I was very disappointed. That's really about the only time I've had a bad experience. All the other times have been good. The one that a lot of folks were talking about earlier, Mr. McCool, and several members of the board, we did the 21-day racial equity challenge is what we did, which was really good because it was kind of like this, but it was meeting every week and doing a lot of homework and reading and stuff and just talking, and that was very helpful. That was a very good experience again, but the bad was the really confrontational and accusatory experiences. Not good.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I have had those experiences. I've had the classes where the whole time it's just somebody pointing the finger, telling me how I've done wrong, how I've messed it up. We're in this situation because of all the stuff that I've done. Right. And we call that calling people out. Right. Just really jumping in there to call people out. And what True and I like to do, we like to call people in. We like to flip the script. Right. I like to call you in. I don't want to call you out. I want to call you in. Because I want us to be on the same team, and I want us to work together, and I want us to be willing to commit to one another that we're in this together, right? And so today we are definitely going to call people in, not call them out. So I can assure you that there won't be any of that going on today. Really, really good point. Thank you, Mayor. Who else? Anybody else had negative experiences with diversity training? No? No negatives?
Apparently only me.
Well, I have, and I was telling you about when the patrol was doing its first diversity training with you can imagine. I remember one of the majors telling one of the captains that was doing the training was telling him, say, well, listen now, I don't want you to get caught up in the diversity training mess too much. Just hit the light side. We don't want to hear about that. Now, this is a major telling the captain that was doing the training that, in other words, he was saying, we don't want to hear the truth. Just hit us a little light and then move on with it, but don't get into it. Well, needless to say, when he said that, the team that was brought in, they really got into it and really started showing how biased, prejudiced the highway patrol was. I remember when I got on the patrol, they had standards that you had to be 6 foot tall and to get on. And I was 6 foot, but the guy that was interviewing me, now keep in mind, he had been on for many years. The guy that interviewed me was 5'10". And I said, now, if your standards is 6 foot, how did you get on? But it was the Good Old Boy Network. And we knew that. But one of the toughest things that was for the patrol is when we got in, the blacks got in, they started moving the promotional scale. When we came on in 75, you could be promoted to sergeant in 7 years if you had your good record. So when majority of the blacks got 6 years, they moved it to 10 years. All right, so we didn't think much of that, but then when we got 9 years, they moved it to 12 years. So it was like the greyhound chasing the rabbit, but we never could catch the rabbit. And so that's the type of bad experience I had with the patrol. But being the rookie when I first got down to Anson County, I was in High Point when applying for the patrol in 74. There was a trooper pumping gas, white trooper pumping gas. And I asked him, I said, sir, I'm looking to get on the highway patrol. And he looked at me pumping gas and he said, we ain't hiring now. He said, you could be a driver license examiner, but we ain't hiring no troopers now. So I was smart, and I was a senior and I wanted to be a state trooper. And so I was a little bit offended with him saying that. And it made me even more now to want to be a state trooper. So I left High Point, went to Burlington, applied, and of course got on. And when I got out of Rook School, they sent me to Anson County. And lo and behold, that trooper I met at the gas bar had made sergeant, and they sent him to Anson County. He was my boss at the time. And listen, Chief and Chief, this is the goddamn truth. He was my sergeant, and when I arrived, and I was 21 years old, coming from A&T, and you got to know A&T because we had a big ride in 69, 70 up in there. It was just, so anyway, I got there at 70. So when I got there, this sergeant looked at me, he said, Larry Whitley, he said, black is beautiful, so is tan, but white's the color of your boss, man. This is in 1975. I said, oh my God, where have I landed down here? But you know what? Over the years, we talked about relationship, breaking bread together, and hard work and effort, and hopefully me trying to see them that being black was no different being white. He began to become one of my best friends over the years. And so it is just getting to know people and talking relationship. But that was a bad experience, but it turned to good. And I could tell you a lot of those, but same throughout life, but we're better. We're better.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for sharing that. And so what I heard about that early diversity training that you experienced there at the patrol was we didn't really want to do any diversity training. We just wanted to check a box, right?
That's what
we just want to check a box.
That's what it was.
We didn't really want to get into it. So, that is definitely not where we are today. We want to get into it, right? We're not here to check a box, but there are positive ways that you can do it. It doesn't have to be negative to really get into it. And I'm glad to hear how that relationship ended up, right? As you built the relationship and helped him understand, who you were as a person, and not just as a black man. Right, because it sounds like maybe that's the way he was seeing you to begin with. But the more he spent some time with you, he saw you for much more than the color of your skin.
Hey, Chief, and the guy I'm speaking, he's dead now, but he's trending. Now, if you want to see who he is, watch The Color Purple. You remember when Oprah hit the mayor?
Yeah.
The mayor was my sergeant. That's the one that was there. He played that role, the mayor, in Color Purple.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, but I think your experience is the reality of what can happen, right? If we build a relationship, it can completely change the outcome. It can completely change the mindset. Talking about another film, The Best of Enemies, right? Great film, great picture. And it shows just what a big shift can occur in somebody when you build a relationship. It's easy to hate from afar, but it's really hard to hate up close, right? And the closer you get to somebody, the more you're going to see the positives and not so much what you believe are the negatives. So really good point. Anybody else have negative experiences with diversity training? This is such great discussion. True, this is probably the best segment that we've had on this in a long, long time. I mean, you guys are bringing it strong. So thanks so much. Any other negative experiences you want to highlight before we get ready to move on? No, seeing some heads shaking, so I think we might have covered it. And so real quick, and I don't know if you'll have anything, but I also said we wanted to get if you were just designing it, it wasn't an experience you've had, positive or negative, but if you were designing diversity training, what do you think should be put into it? What do you think we should do to have good diversity training? Anything come to mind?
Openness.
Okay.
Being open and truthful. Not afraid to say black or white. I told you one of the things that I so oftentimes share is through black eyes. What blue eyes see is not what black eyes see. I remember me and Jeff were talking about a crib a long time ago in our relationship, and he thought I was talking about a baby crib, but black folks, that's your house, a crib. And so it's just different meanings of the same word, but it's different thing.
I thought it was only a crib in the 70s. I heard it in Chicago, but they went out with bell bottoms.
Hey, look,
That's your pad, right?
we will talk in a few minutes about my experience in the barbershop. But in the barbershop, it happens all the time, right? There's conversation going on, and I got to raise my hand, and somebody will call on me. I'm like, what does bougie mean? I have no idea what you mean when you say bougie, right? And so there's this whole language that just completely goes over my head, and I got to ask for clarification all the time. So I feel you. I feel you on that, Jeff. I know where you're coming from. But no, you're right. We got to be open. We got to be honest. We got to not be afraid to have the discussion, right? And so often I think we're afraid that we're going to say something wrong or say the wrong thing or offend somebody. I mean, even to the extent, and I remember I struggled with this, right? I remember struggling over, do I say black or African American? Right. I literally would stumble sometimes when I was getting ready to say, I'd be talking to Drew. I'm like, and I saw this guy and he was a black man. Like, I'm literally struggling in my mind whether I say black or African American. Right. It's that simple. But if we don't spend time talking about it, then little things like that can really trip us up. Right. And so we've got to be willing to just kind of wade into it, extend each other some grace. We may not say things exactly right all the time, right? But understand where each other's coming from, the fact that we are here for a good reason, that we all want to be here. We're all engaged in this conversation because our heart's in the right place. And if we stumble over a word, then give me a little grace on that and understand where I'm coming from. But be open, be honest, be candid, because that's where the magic can really happen. So thanks for offering that, Commissioner Whitley. Anybody else want to throw something before I give it back to True?
I think in any organization, including this one, if we looked at all the employees of the town, it's inevitable when you say we're going to have diversity training, someone will say, "Oh man, what do we need that for?" So I think maybe any good diversity training should start off by saying why it's necessary.
Absolutely.
Because that question comes up every time. What do we need that for? We don't have any issues here. We don't need diversity training.
Yeah, no, really good point, Mayor. And we will talk about the why. I think it's important to understand why that's necessary. And we'll also talk about why you may think that it's not necessary, right? I'll share my own experience with that here in the next segment, because I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding about that as well. And it comes down to whether or not you're asking the question. So really good point. Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Miller.
Thank you. To answer my opinion on your question of black versus African American is that I prefer black. I was born in Chicago. I'm not a European American. Larry was born in Zebulon. Why can't we all be American? And then part two of that, and I know this is a sensitive topic, is why does the NAACP, why don't they change their initials? I mean, who's using colored people? I just don't see that happening. But most of us, if we are seeking common ground, we should be looked at as Americans, because there aren't a lot of people, black people that I know that were born in Africa. I have some neighbors across the street from the Congo. I rent to some people from the Congo, and I know them very, very well. But the majority of the black people I know are just Americans. They're black. They were born here.
Jeff, the reason I can speak, because I'm a member of the NAACP, that was one of the things that my father back in the early 60s, required of our children, number one, to vote, and number two, to be a part of the NAACP. What happened back in the 60s with the civil rights movement, the only way that blacks, and keep in mind, coming from Africa, slavery, and back, and that's why I was sharing, I'm reading this book. It's called The Color of Compromise. And it goes back to blacks and heritage and racism and how all of this came about. Blacks was taken from Africa, and I just, because unwilling, they were separated. We were brought to America and became slaves. And then once we were looking for identity as black, we went through being colored. That's why the NAACP, and then went through black. James Brown, Black is Beautiful. You remember the song he made back in that day, and then we come to African American, and these names came for blacks trying to become identified or who we were as a people. But no matter what name we took, whether it was colored, black, African American, blacks in America is still not being accepted under the Constitution, as all men are created equal. And this is in this book. This is why it's so good. We're not all created equal. We were born equal, but in America, black men are not treated equal even today. Even today, we are not equal because there's something called white privilege. And I want you, and we talk about this, so y'all understand white privilege. Being white in America, you have a leg up on me being black. Just because of your color, you have a leg up on me. That'll open doors. You being white open doors that mine won't open. That's why, Jeff, where you go through color, black, and African American. Now, I don't really prefer being called colored. It don't bother me now, neither one, because I've been called worse than that when I was on the patrol. But at the same time, you said calling me a black man, that don't offend me because I am a black man. African American, that doesn't offend me as well. Either one is good with me, but it's not good with every black person now. So that's the difference, Jill. And I know for you to share it, ask that, I shared it. That's what being talking. This is what this is all about. When you say to ask those questions, you get some clarity in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for your explanation there, Mr. Whitley, and thanks for the question, Mr. Miller. And I think that's exactly right. That is the beauty of it, is that we got to have that dialogue. We got to have the conversation and understand why it is, right? Understand a perspective that we don't have, a perspective that I don't have, right? True's got a different perspective based on who he is and where he came from and how he grew up. And so I can have that conversation with True, and he can help me understand better than I'm ever going to understand alone, right? And so that's the beauty of it. So that's a really good point and a really good kind of explanation too. So I appreciate that from both of you. Well, I tell you what, I don't know what it is for commissioners, but I can tell you when you're talking about government workers, you better give them a break every hour, or else you're going to have mutiny on your hands. Everybody needs to step away and hit the restroom or something. So, True, I'm going to throw it back to you real quick before we go to a break and just ask you, do you think we've got kind of good direction for the rest of the day? Do you feel good about this discussion on good, bad, and ideal?
I definitely do, TG, and thank you. And thank you for everyone that made valuable contributions to this discussion. I feel like as long as we go down a path where we're not being judgmental, we're not being accusatory, we allow an open and honest space for people to feel comfortable that they can be open and honest without hesitation of being judged. So that this is a safe space. We will not be judgmental. We will not be accusatory, and that we will make it beneficial with outcomes, that when people walk away, that we all walk away with some key learnings and some proposed action steps. So I feel like if we're able to accomplish those things, and I feel like we are, then it will have met the expectations of everyone this evening. Okay. So is that accurate? I see some head nods. So I feel good about it, TG. I feel we're on a good path. So what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and take a 10-minute break. And then when we come back, we'll resume and kind of pick up where we're leaving off, as TG and I will talk a little bit about how this journey has taught us a lot of valuable lessons and simply taking the time to get to know each other. So I believe it is 6:32. So let's come back in 10 minutes, 6:42. We'll see you all in 10 minutes.
What you eating there, Dave? Got you muted out. Got you muted out. You're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm eating blueberries. They're good.
All right. How you been?
I haven't had any breakfast or lunch. This is my dinner.
Oh my goodness. I grabbed a little bit earlier before we got started because I know it'll be a long night tonight.
I think Renee is the one that sent me the message to remind me. Were you the one that sent me? I don't know.
No, it was Lori, I think.
Whoever it was, thank you. Since the courts have started back, I've got so many cases on the calendar, it's about to blow my socks off.
I bet. I bet. District Court.
No, Superior Court trials. They're thinking they can catch up a year of having no court in like 2 or 3 months. It's not easy like that.
Wow. I bet it is backed up.
It's crazy they can only do one case a week because of COVID.
All right, well, it looks like everyone is back. So welcome back, everyone. And again, thank you all for your valuable contributions in the first portion of our time together. That helps Chief and I a lot in knowing the direction that we need to go with making sure we help everyone get as much as they can out of this discussion. And so what we want to talk a little bit about now is how this brotherhood, this partnership and this bond came to be. Because it wasn't always the relationship that you see before you today. And I think I heard from a number of you talk about the importance of relationship. And then you reinforced our message and our philosophy of the importance of getting to know others. Because oftentimes we do stereotype people based on our own unconscious bias, quite honestly, and how we've been conditioned to see people, whether it's just based on what they look like or what they do. And in my case, it was a little bit of both, because I did not always like what Chief represented, to be completely and totally honest with you. And I just, for most of my adult life, I'll put it like this, I did not like and I did not trust the police, particularly if they were white male police officers. And that's why I said to you all earlier that if you would have told me that one of the closest people to me on this planet would be a white male police officer from the South, if you would have told me that 10 years ago, I wouldn't have bought it. But that is the reality of my life today. And I'm extremely grateful for that because of how much richness Chief, the relationship with Chief, has brought into my life. And the background to that is I grew up in Baltimore. I'm originally from Baltimore. And growing up where I grew up in Baltimore and how I grew up in Baltimore, it was a very violent neighborhood, a lot of drugs, a lot of violence, and a lot of, shootings, and just a neighborhood that had a lot of bad actors. Now, I and a lot of my friends were not those bad actors that were perpetrating these crimes, but the police that policed the neighborhood where I grew up treated us all the same. And it was a predominantly Black neighborhood where I grew up in West Baltimore. And the police that policed that neighborhood left an impression on me as a child. And this was during elementary and middle school years, primarily, because I was on the receiving end of excessive force pretty regularly. And not just me, a lot of my friends that grew up in that same neighborhood. Now, granted, if you knew where and how I grew up, you would probably agree that there were some people who needed that type of discipline and that type of behavior from law enforcement. But the reality is not all of us. And the vast majority of us were not the ones that were committing these acts. And so that was my experience growing up in Baltimore, so much to the point that you just kind of normalize it. You're like, okay, this is just the way life is. So fast forward now, I go off to college. I went to DeVry University in Atlanta. So I graduated with a degree in electrical engineering. Now, this is where you're like, so remember, we're being vulnerable and transparent. So I'm giving y'all the whole full story. No judgment, right? No judgment. We all agreed on that. Is that right? Yeah, I see some heads nodding. I see. Dave, did you nod? I didn't see you nod, Dave. No judgment. Is that yeah? Okay, all right. Just check, make sure. All right, no judgment. And so, so I graduate from DeVry University, got my degree in electrical engineering, but I decided, you know what? This is not what I want to do with my life. So what do? I moved to Los Angeles, the city of angels, Los Angeles, California, to pursue a career as a rap artist. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. I was a rapper for about 3 years of my life. It's like, you know what? I'm going to do away with this degree and I'm going to chase my dream. So I lived in LA for about 3 years of my life. And during that time, I lived in the Crenshaw district. And during that time, there was a 7-Eleven nearby where I would go. It was pretty much my grocery store. I would go to the 7-Eleven a lot. And I remember coming out of this 7-Eleven one day, and a bunch of police cars are coming in hot. They're coming in fast and furious. And something clearly is about to happen. So I'm walking out. I'm trying to get out of the way. Had a gallon of milk in a plastic bag. I remember it like yesterday. Police jumping out of the car. They're running towards the door. And I'm really trying to move. I'm like, man, what is going on? One of the officers grabs me. He throws me to the ground. Bag of milk goes flying. I'm face down on the blacktop of this parking lot. He's got his knee in my back. He's got his hand pressed against my face, pressing it against the parking lot. And he had drawn his weapon and had pressed his weapon against the side of my head. And the very first words he said to me that I could hear, that I could make out, were, "Give me a reason. I wish you would." And he is taunting and teasing me. And I'm just processing this. Like, so you want to kill me? This guy wants to take my life. And I'm scared to death at this point. I don't know what to do. So I'm just complying in every way possible that I know how. And I end up getting taken in. They handcuff me, throw me in a car, take me in. What ended up happening is these officers had gotten a call that there was an armed robbery in place at a nearby 7-Eleven. And it was not the 7-Eleven that I was coming from, but this is where they showed up. And long story short, it was a case of mistaken identity, and they had showed up at the wrong location. And apparently I fit the description. And I get that could happen, right? People can fit the description. And if you get a call with, an armed robbery and you have to show up with precaution, I understand all of that. But the way that I was treated and the manner in which I was treated, coupled with my experiences growing up in Baltimore, and then to make matters worse, once they worked everything out and I was finally released, because fortunately for me, I thank God, they actually caught the guy that they were looking for. And it's probably what led to me being released, or I don't know what would have happened, to be honest with you. They caught the guy that they were looking for and they confirmed that it was him. And so they finally released me. And I still had my Maryland driver's license with my Baltimore address on it at that time. And I remember the officer, when he released me, he tossed my license onto the desk and said to me, well, look, this isn't Be-More, so you get out of here and be more careful. And so that, I guess, was his form of an apology. So that stuck with me. I carried that. So most of my adult life, I did not like and I did not trust the police. Wasn't mean or nasty towards them, but just did not want to have anything to do with them. I avoided them at all costs. And so now I fast forward to 2014. So that was my experience with law enforcement. And so now when I fast forward to 2014, I'm living in Cary. You all saw the picture of my son earlier. He was 2 years old at the time. So I'm living in Cary. And if you're familiar with Cary, Cary is a predominantly white, relatively affluent community. And in August of 2014 is when the incident took place in Ferguson, Missouri, where Officer Darren Wilson shot and killed Michael Brown. I'm sure we all remember that. And that affected the nation. And it affected me in a way that I didn't quite understand at the time, but I have a much clearer understanding of it now after being able to process and navigate through some cognitive exercises and get a better understanding of why it affected me the way that it did. And the reason that it affected me the way that it did was because I had a son, because I had navigated life on my own, had seen incidents and heard of other incidents where the police had shot and killed unarmed Black men. And I just navigated through that, processed it, normalized it. But at that time, I was navigating life for myself. And it was one thing to do it for myself. But having a son changed things for me. And raising a son in Cary, this predominantly white, affluent community, I was afraid for my son's safety. I was afraid because of the police. And the irony of that, when I was growing up, my mom was concerned for the safety of me and my brother every day as we went out to play in the neighborhood where we lived, but it was because of the environment in which we lived. And I'd like to believe my mom's no longer with us, but to have been able to live in a place like Cary, I believe that's what my mom would have hoped and wished for us growing up. And the irony of that to me is now I'm afraid for my child for completely different reasons. And so I felt a sense of hopelessness and helplessness, quite honestly, that I could not even protect my son from things that had happened to me in my experiences with law enforcement, or even worse, that it would end in a fatality, like the images that I had seen play out on my social media and in news media over and over. And I wish that on no one, a sense of helplessness and hopelessness as a parent as to how you can protect your child. And I did not know what to do. My hope was that, okay, if I could establish some level of familiarity with who he is growing up in this community, like if for some reason he had to have some sort of interaction and engagement with law enforcement, whether he got into some sort of mischief, just being a young child playing with his friends, I don't know, a ball breaks a window or something, or maybe there was one of the neighbors who just did not know he lived there and didn't think he belonged there. What if they called the police? And that required some sort of interaction and engagement with law enforcement. These were real fears that I lived with. And I didn't know what to do with that. And it was my hope that if I could just establish some level of familiarity with who he is, at a minimum, that exchange would be, oh my gosh, Austin, you should know better. I'm calling your dad. If I could at least establish that, I would have felt like, okay, maybe I would have done my part as a parent. So the incident in Ferguson with Michael Brown and Darren Wilson took place on Saturday, August 9th, 2014. That following Wednesday, August 13th, 2014, I visited my local barbershop. There's a Black owned and operated barbershop in Cary called Headliners, which is the barbershop that I attend. And I would go there pretty, with as much frequency as I could, kind of a standing appointment on Wednesdays. And so this particular Wednesday, I'm in the barbershop. And if you know anything about the culture of the Black barbershop, anyone ever been to the Black barbershop, having an experience with the Black barbershop? Okay. Well, then, Chief and Mr. Whitley, you two can attest to me that the culture of the barbershop is that you talk about anything and everything. Nothing's off limits. I mean, you can debate about anything, everything, talk about whatever you want. You can talk about sports, talk about politics, talk about current events, you talk about relationships. I mean, I've gotten some of the best and worst relationship advice in the barbershop. So if you get relationship advice, just be discerning. That's all I'm gonna tell you. But in any event, so I go into the barbershop this day and they are talking about the incident in Ferguson, right? It's a current event. It's a hot topic. And I'm already experiencing some emotion about everything that went on. So I find myself diving into the conversation head first. They're talking about Ferguson and what's going on. And I just jump right into the conversation. I'm like, oh, yeah, y'all right, man. Y'all right. And another thing about the police and this and that, and shared some of my experiences. And I'm going on and on now, specifically about the Cary PD. Now, mind you, I had never met a Cary police officer in my life, but in my mind, I had them all figured out. I was like, you know what, the Cary PD, they want to protect and serve the white community members, but they want to police the Black community members. Like, man, this could be you. This could be you. I happen to know you're a lawyer. I happen to know you're a teacher. I happen to know you're an entrepreneur, but they don't know that. They probably don't even care. This could have happened to any of us. And I'm just going on and on and on. Next thing I know, I'm holding court. And that's rare in the barbershop because everybody's always talking all over each other, talking over top of each other. And next thing I know, everybody's quiet and they're listening to me. And at that moment, I felt like, wow, I feel compelled to say something of substance. Because prior to that, I was just talking trash. I'm good at that. And now I had to say something of substance. And the next words that came out of my mouth, it really changed the trajectory of my life because of the decision it led to. I said, you know what? I have a good mind to go down to the Cary PD tomorrow and give them a piece of my mind and let them know that we will no longer put up with this. It's unacceptable. It's irresponsible. It's inappropriate. And we're going to put a stop to this. I will no longer let this happen on my watch, guys. I'm going to represent for all of us. I'm going to go down there tomorrow and I'm going to put a stop to all of this injustice. Hey, look, it worked because they were like, yeah, true. They hyped me up. They were like, yeah, true. That's right. Yeah, you the man. Let him have it. Go down there. Give it to him. Give it to him. I felt really good about myself. They boosted my ego. I walked out of the barbershop, chest all poked out, feeling good about myself. I didn't get my hair cut that day, Jeff, but that's all right. I was just feeling so hyped. I hopped into my car feeling good. And so I got home and my wife happened to be home that day. And so now I'm really excited because look, just as a man, as a husband, I don't know if the rest of the men like this, but I know I am. I like to get props from my wife. I like to say things that make me look heroic. So I just had this grandstand experience at the barbershop where I was being celebrated. So I said, I'm going to tell my wife what I just committed to do. And she's going to celebrate me. She's going to lift me up as a hero. And I'm like, hey, babe, I was just at the barbershop. They were talking about Ferguson. You know how I feel about Ferguson. And I was all fired up. And I let them know I was going to represent for the community. I was going to represent. And I'm going down to the Cary PD tomorrow. And I'm going to represent for all of us. I'm going to give them a piece of my mind. Y'all, she looked me dead in my eyes and she said, no, you're not. I said, whoa, wait, what, baby? What you talking about? She's like, no, you're not going to do nothing. You're just going to go down there and get yourself in trouble. No, not happening. And so I said, all right, babe. But then I said, well, babe, but you got to understand, like, this is the culture. This is the culture of the bar. Like, I explained to her that basically I sold tickets. I said, look, I told the fellas at the shop, this is what I was going to do. Now, if I do not do this, y'all already know what the deal is. If I don't do what I said I was going to do, what's going to happen, Larry? I can't go back to the barbershop. I can't go back. And so I explained this to her, explained the cultural, the code. And she said, all right, I tell you what, I'm going to go to Sally's. I'm going to buy some clippers. I'll start cutting your hair and you never have to go back to the barbershop again. Problem solved. I was like, wow, look at that. So again, being the husband that I am, I said, all right, babe. Now, this is where I'm going to need a little bit of help. I won't need a little bit of help. I just... in my mind, my interpretation, when I said, all right, babe, to me, I've learned my lesson. Let me just say I have since learned my lesson. Let me make this confession. But to me, when I said, all right, babe, that meant I heard what you said. That was not a suggestion that I am in agreement or compliant with your wishes. That just meant I heard what you said. So the next day, I decided to go down to the police department anyway. But the flip side of that story, I can tell y'all that another time, because I felt like I was disobedient. But that's a whole nother story that I had to deal with those consequences. But in any event, I hopped into my car. I go down to the Cary PD. I pull up in that parking lot. I storm across the parking lot. I get to the front door. I looked at that front door and I kicked it wide open. I walked into the lobby of that police department. I said, hey, I need to speak to someone, and I need to speak to someone now, because I know y'all see what's going on across the country. It's unacceptable. It's inappropriate. It's irresponsible. And I need to talk to somebody about putting a stop to all of this injustice. So the lady behind the desk said, sir, can you calm down? I said, I'll calm down when I see someone. So she left. Now I'm feeling like I felt when I was in the barbershop again, like, yeah, my words have power. That's right. I had some efficacy at the barbershop. I'm having some efficacy and impact now here at the police department. Yeah, I'm on a roll. Just call me butter, right? I'm on a roll. So she left, and then she came back, but she did not come back alone. She did not come back alone. She came back with an officer that at the time I felt like was the biggest, whitest police officer I'd ever seen in my life. And I think, John, you said you're about 6'5". JB's every bit of 6'5", about 260. And I was like, at that point, I realized I probably should have listened to my wife. So she came back, and JB, his name is Jeremy Bergen, goes by JB. And now, fortunately, JB and I are friends to this day. But I had some hesitation in the decision that I made. I thought I might have made a bad life decision at that point. So he comes out and says, sir, can I help you, sir? I was like, well, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on across the country. And the community members are concerned about how that's affecting us here locally in Cary. And I just want to talk to somebody about where the Cary PD stands. He's like, all right, we'll come on back to my office. We go back to his office. We have a conversation. And JB asked, talk to me. What's on your mind? And I just shared my heart with him. I shared how I felt. I shared what I thought. I was completely transparent and vulnerable. And JB sat there and he listened to me. He listened. He didn't stop me. He didn't interrupt me. He listened to me. And when I was done sharing, JB's words to me were true. I'm sorry those things happened to you. What can I do to change the way you feel about the Cary PD and this profession that I love? I was not expecting that. Not at all. I don't know what I was expecting, but I would, at a minimum, I was expecting for whoever I met with to be defensive, dismissive, maybe even condescending in some way. But that was not the case. And then after he showcased that level of empathy and understanding, he challenged me and he said, and what are some things you think you can do to help us change the hearts and minds of other men and women that feel and think the way that you do? Again, I was not expecting that. And then he introduced me to Chief. And I received the same levels of empathy and understanding from Chief when I met Chief. Now, why that was so amazing to me is because I know now that I shared some things that were rooted in false narratives. I shared some things that were probably offensive to someone that represents that profession, that were probably offensive to JB and Chief at the time. But they responded with empathy and understanding. They could have easily believed that, well, the reason those things happened to you, you must have done something, but they didn't accuse me of what did you do? The response was, I'm sorry those things happened to you. What can I do to change the way you feel about this profession? Because that's not a representation of all of us in this profession. Because the things that happened to me, and they weren't dismissive of that. And so the lessons that I learned in that initial encounter are principles that I still apply to this day in the work that I've been called to do as a bridge builder. The things that JB showed me, and I don't know that if he really understood, well, I've since talked to him about the impact that he made in that moment, and I give him all the credit in the world. Couple of things that JB did in that exchange. The first thing that he did was he listened to understand. He didn't just listen to reply. He really listened to hear me, to understand. It was active listening and not competitive listening. Competitive listening is when we're simply listening to reply. We're waiting for an opportunity to dismiss or debunk or diffuse whatever it is someone else is saying if it doesn't line up with what we believe. Right. And so, but he didn't do that. He listened to understand. And the second thing that he did was he sought first to understand before being understood, because he wanted to make sure he understood where I was coming from, how I felt, and why, more importantly, why I felt the way that I felt. But then he shared his perspective with me. And I know now that the reason I was in such a good headspace to hear and receive from him is because he had extended that courtesy to me. He had allowed me to share and express. And that put me in the right frame of mind to hear and receive from him. Because when JB shared with me, I realized in that moment that I was actually doing the same thing to him in the Cary PD, that I was accusing them of doing to me and people that look like me. I was painting that profession, the men and women in that profession, with the same broad brush because of the behavior of a select few. Because the things that happened, but JB didn't do it. Tony didn't do it. Jerry didn't do it. Robin didn't do it. Rob didn't do it. Kat didn't do it. All the great men and women that I have since met at the Cary PD and departments across the country. And it was during that exchange that I had that revelation and got to know these men and women. And so my response to the challenge that JB and Chief had extended to me was to invite them to the very barbershop, Headliners Barbershop, Black owned and operated barbershop, where I was talking trash about them, to invite them to the barbershop so that the men and women in that shop and in that community could get to meet the human beings that I had gotten to meet, to get to know them on a human level, to realize that, wow, if we get to know them, if you get to know them like I did, like I have, you'll realize that we actually all want the same thing. And I wanted the officers to get the chance to meet the men and women in the shop, the men and women in that community that I knew that they had not established relationships with, just from all the conversations we had in the shop. And I knew if I could help the cops get to know these men and women on a human level, that they would have the same revelation, that we all want the same thing, to help break down these barriers and these biases. And Chief and JB accepted that offer, and they came to the barbershop to have some conversation, to take the time to get to know each other. And we began a series of facilitated dialogues and conversations where we could hear and share diverse perspectives in an effort for us all to collaborate and co-create on ideas and solutions to help us all better coexist for the greater good of all in that community. And we didn't stop there. We agreed that we would meet on the first Saturday of every month to continue the dialogue, to continue the conversation. And we started that back in 2014, as I said, and we have been doing it since then and have not missed a first Saturday in over 7 years. And even since the pandemic, we've taken it virtual and doing it in this format via Zoom. And I cannot begin to tell you, I cannot begin to quantify the transformation that has taken place in the hearts and minds of the men and women in the community and in the Cary PD. The lives that have been transformed and, dare I say, saved because of relationships that have been born out of these facilitated dialogues and discussions. And so the lessons that I took away from that were the importance of just exercising empathy, listening to understand and not to reply, and seeking first to understand before being understood, which are principles that I apply to this day. And it has since spread from Cary, starting within that region to Apex and Morrisville and Raleigh and Garner and Fuquay and Holly Springs, and then eventually across the state, and then eventually across the country. And I'm forever grateful that JB showcased that level of empathy, that planted that seed that was able to blossom and grow and to be able to bear so much fruit that it's been able to bear across the country from that point until now. And then, and I want to give Chief the opportunity to talk about how that experience affected him in the profession, and being someone that was on the receiving end of a lot of that judgment and accusation from me and others when we first met and the first time you walked through those doors of that barbershop.
Yeah, thanks, True. And before I share my perspective, I want to back up a little bit. I want to back up to something True said. And, you know, you guys remember we said, number one, we're going to be open and honest, right? And number two, we said we weren't going to be judgmental. But I got to tell you, you guys, not all of you held up your end of the bargain, because when True said he came to our police department and he kicked in our front door. Y'all remember he said kicked in our front door? He said kicked in our front door. He even gave a sound effect. He said boom, kicked in our front door, right? When he said that, like, I got the side eye, not from Commissioner Whitley, not from Pastor Whitley. He went straight back to Trooper Whitley days, and he gave me the side eye like, why you let that man come up to your house like that? Right? I saw you, Trooper Whitley. I know you looked at me like, I can't believe you let him do that. And so before we go too far, I want to give True the opportunity to tell the truth about the way that happened. So just 15 seconds, True. Get it right.
Oh, get it right? Is that what you call it? All right, look. All right. I'll say this really quickly. I didn't actually kick the door in. Okay, I didn't actually kick it in. Truth be told, the door pulls out. Right, so it'd have been a little tough to kick it in. But I do want you all to know, I pulled it with intention. I pulled it I meant business. And I did walk into the lobby. There was a lovely young lady at the desk, and I walked up to the desk. Excuse me, ma'am. I'm here. The community has some concerns. I don't know who to talk to. We want to talk to somebody about some concerns the community has about what's going on across the country. Is there anyone I can talk to? She's like, yeah, sure. Stay right here. The Sergeant over Community Services, and then JB's the Sergeant over Community Services at the time. She said, just left. Let me grab him. I just saw him walk around the corner. It's perfect timing. She went to grab JB, and it was perfect timing. I can't believe it. Like the timing of it all, that he was there and available the moment that I walked through those doors. She went and she got JB, and JB came back around the corner. It's like, sir, can I help you, sir? And I explained what I wanted to do. He called me into his office, and everything after that happened exactly the way that I said it happened. All right.
There you go. See, don't you feel better?
Yeah, I feel better as a trooper because man. You saw it in me, Chief.
I did. I saw it like really quick. You like, I can't believe you let that man do that. So now you know the real story there, Trooper Whitley. We can go back to Pastor Whitley now. Yeah, absolutely. So, but in all seriousness, y'all, I don't know about y'all, but True and I, we believe that there's no such thing as coincidence. Everything happens for a reason. And True came through our front door at the perfect time, right? Because at Cary PD, we have been doing a little bit of soul searching, to be perfectly honest. We have been looking at how we relate to our community and our minority community in particular. And the largest minority in Cary is Asian, specifically Asian Indian. And we looked at that and said, you know what, we're doing okay there. We had made some efforts and some outreach and engagement efforts, and we felt okay, right? And so our second largest minority is Latino, Hispanic. And as we looked at that, we thought, you know what, we're doing pretty good there. So we were okay. And then our third largest minority in Cary is our African-American community. And as we looked at that, we realized that we had kind of missed the mark, right? That we weren't doing what we should be doing and what we could be doing in that part of our community. And so we had actually already started coming up with an idea and putting some things in place to sit down with faith-based leaders in the African-American community, pastors, elders, from predominantly African-American congregations in Cary. And although True is not a faith-based leader, he is a man of great faith. And so when he came through our door, we saw that passion and we said, you know what, this guy will be a great fit for the work that I feel like we need to do. And so we invited True to join us in what we went on to call our Building Bridges group. And we set it up and I can't help but smile a little bit there, Commissioner Whitley, because the way we envisioned it was to come in and share a meal, right? We wanted to invite these pastors in to sit down and 8 or 9 pastors and 8 or 9 cops, and let's sit down, number one, and share a meal. And then let's have some discussion. And so we did that. And I remember I learned some really big lessons that night. And I remember the very first one was when I asked the question, what is the opinion of the Cary Police Department in your community, in your church, in your social circle, your family, your friends? When you think of Cary PD, what do you think? And what I thought I was going to hear is, it's okay. I wasn't crazy enough to think that I was going to be told that it was a great impression, but I thought I'd get it's okay. That's not what I got. What I got was what you heard True say a moment ago. The perception in the Black community is that you are here to protect and serve the white community, and you police the Black community. And guys, I got to tell you, like, I didn't see that coming, right? That was the left hook that I was looking right when he came in from the left. And it stung, right? It hurt. And we really kind of had two choices. We could either kind of get indignant about that and go, you know what, that's not fair. That's not who we are. And kind of get a take our ball and go home kind of attitude about it. Or we could say, we need to do something about that because it's not who we are, right? And our citizens deserve to understand that. They deserve to understand that we're here for everybody, including our Black community. Right. And so we need to change that perspective. And so I asked the question, I said, you know, where can we have that conversation? Where's the best place if we want to have real conversation and connect with the community? And the answer was there's two great places in the African-American community to do that. They said you get the churched at church and you get the unchurched at the barbershop. Right.
That's right.
And so I said, well, you know, we're already sitting down with the pastors and we're going to be in your churches and we want to do things together. So it sounds to me like I need to find a way into the barbershop. Right now, I always feel like it's important. And so a moment ago, Commissioner Whitley raised his hand when True said, who's been to the Black barbershop? You know, he raised his hand, said he's been to the barbershop. I feel the need to defend the people in the barbershop and point out that not everybody in the barbershop is unchurched. Right. Church people go to the barbershop, too. So don't walk into the Black barbershop thinking that Commissioner Whitley is unchurched, because clearly that is not the case, right? But I think the point was really well taken, right? If you want to have real conversation, if you want to get into the stuff that is really difficult to talk about, then you got to go where people are comfortable, right? And in the Black community, two of those places is the church and then the barbershop. And so I said, True, we got to go to the barbershop. And True's like, I got you. And so in order to understand the rest of the story, you got to understand the guy who owns the barbershop. And the guy that owns the barbershop is a man named Tron Watson. Tron owns Headliners, owned it for about 19 years. And at that time, he was about 40 years old. And Tron was in a place very similar to you heard True saying where he was earlier, right? Tron did not like and did not trust a single police officer in the world. Right? If you wore a uniform, he did not like you. He did not trust you. And I'm not criticizing Tron when I say that. Tron grew up in Camden, New Jersey, right across the river from Philadelphia. And he had experiences in life that led him to feel the way he felt about law enforcement. Right? And so that's where he was. And it's important to know that. And so we agreed we were going to have these conversations. And it turned out we set a date for the first Saturday of the month. And keep in mind, this is shortly after Ferguson. This is in the weeks following the events in Ferguson back in 2014. And I sent a message out to my department and says, hey, I'm going to go to the barbershop, Black barbershop, Headliners, and I'm going to have a conversation about law enforcement and the Black community. And if anybody wants to join me, I welcome you to come and be a part of that discussion. I'm not making anybody be there, but the offer is extended. And guys, I don't mind telling you that as I got ready to go to the barbershop for the first time, I was scared. Like for real, it was one of the most scary things that I had done in my career. And that sounds crazy when you know what I've done, right? I've been on tactical operations. I was SWAT team. I was undercover, worked narcotics for many years. And none of those things worried me like walking into the barbershop to have that conversation. And as I think about it now, it makes sense, right? Because I've been trained in tactical operations. I've been trained in undercover operations, narcotics. I've never been trained in how to have a conversation about race. I didn't know if I was going to make things better or worse. I didn't know what to say. But I knew this for sure. If I can't even talk about it, I don't have a chance of making it any better. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to go have a conversation. And so when I pulled up in the parking lot that morning, 8 a.m., I tell you what, it was one of the most proud moments of my career because I pulled in that parking lot and there was 14 Cary police cars in that parking lot. And I knew that every person that drove one of those cars was just as uncomfortable as I was. right? Because they didn't know what to do either. They didn't know what to say either, but they understood the opportunity that was in front of them. And so I was incredibly proud of every one of them that joined me there that day. And we went in, we had that conversation. And let me tell you, it was pointed, it was direct. They didn't pull punches. They weren't worried about political correctness, and they weren't worried about how you feel. They gave it to you like they thought it. They gave it to you like they felt it. But I can honestly say this. At the end of the conversation, it was respectful, and I feel like we made some progress, right? I don't feel like we turned anybody around 180 degrees. We didn't completely solve any problems, right? But we made progress. And I said, you know what? That's good enough for me. Let's keep doing this. And so I said, Tron, we want to come back. And Tron said, okay. I said, no, we want to come back like regularly. And he says, okay. He said, but there's one rule. He said, when you come back, one police car. One police car. He said, it'll be the SWAT truck full of cops. That's fine. He said, but if a brother pulls up and sees 14 police cars, he ain't stopping. He's going to keep going. And I'm still trying to run a business. I said, you know what? That makes perfect sense. I can't argue with Tron on that one. And so we started parking around back and around the corner and down the street and walking in. But we kept coming back. And I'm so incredibly proud of that statistic that True just shared with you. Over 7 years, we have not missed a first Saturday, right? It's become ingrained in who we are, right? And I say we, I mean, not just the police officers. I'm not speaking on behalf of the police officers. I'm talking about the community, right? There are people that would mutiny if we didn't have these monthly rap sessions. There are people that so look forward to it from the police department side and from the community side. And I knew something special was happening, right? Because what I saw was when we first started going, it was the cops are here, right? When we walked in, I heard the murmurs. But then over a little bit of time, it changed. And when we started walking in, they're like, hey, JB's here, Rob's here, Kat's here, Jerry's here, Robin's here. Oh, by the way, they happen to be cops, right? They started identifying us for who we were, not what we do. Because the more time we spent together, the more realization that we had of how much we had in common. We talked about that earlier, right? You get to know people and you get to understand that we're all trying to figure out how we're going to raise our kids, how we're going to pay our bills, how we're going to pay our taxes, how we're going to keep our marriage together, right? We're trying to figure out the same things in life. And we started seeing those similarities with one another, not the differences. And so I knew something special was happening, but it was about 2 years in before I really came to understand just how significant it was. And so flash forward to Memorial Day weekend, 2.5 years into this effort. And I got a phone call Sunday morning. I got that phone call at 5 a.m. that nobody wants to get, no police chief wants to get. And it was my watch commander. And the watch commander said, Chief, we've just shot and killed a 23-year-old black man. His name is Shaquan Johnson. And I said, I'm on the way. Now, y'all, I'd be lying to you if I told you I didn't wonder what's getting ready to happen, right? Because we'd seen how this played out in a lot of places around the country by then, starting with Ferguson, but a lot of places since Ferguson, where you had unrest at best and you had riots at worst. And I wondered, is Cary, North Carolina getting ready to become ground zero for every satellite news feed truck in America? And it was about 3.5 hours into that incident, about 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning. And something happened that completely changed my life. And what happened was I got a text, right? It's been about 3.5 hours. People are getting up. It's 8:30, 9 o'clock. People are getting up and they're seeing the news and they're seeing what the news is reporting. And the news is reporting that there's been a black man that's been killed overnight by a Cary police officer. That's all they're saying. And I'm not faulting them. That's all they had. We hadn't made any statements to that point. So they were reporting what they got, which is almost nothing. And I got a text from JB, the officer you heard True talking about earlier. And he was forwarding me a text that he had gotten from Tron, the guy that owned the barbershop. Because Tron had gotten up that morning and he had seen the news. And he saw that report. And this is exactly what Tron's text said. It said, I know my Cary PD did what was necessary. And the folks in my neighborhood feel the same way. Tell Chief Tony and that officer, we got your back. Guys, you can't imagine what those words meant to me in that moment. As a police chief, I'm wondering what's getting ready to happen. How am I going to hold my department together? How am I going to hold my community together? How am I going to look after my officers that have been through this really traumatizing event? Right? And when I got that message, I knew without a doubt that we were going to be okay. That's what Tron's message told me. Because I knew where Tron had been. I knew he didn't like or trust a single cop in the world 2 years before that. And I knew where he was in that moment. And without the benefit of any information whatsoever, he just said, I don't know what happened, but I know your heart, I know your morals, and I know your values. And that's good enough for me. We'll figure the rest out later. And that's an amazing thing to happen, right? And it completely changed the trajectory of my life. And I can tell you story after story after story about people in the community that had their thought process changed. But that's half the story, because I can also tell you stories about how we as police officers had our thought process changed. As a matter of fact, in that incident, I had to do a press conference the next day. And in that press conference, I did two very specific things because of lessons that the men and the women in the barbershop had taught me, right? And so one of those things was when I talked about the incident and I talked about Shaquan Johnson, I didn't use words like the deceased, the descendant, or the decedent, the suspect, right? I used exactly what I did today. I used his name, Mr. Johnson or Shaquan Johnson, because I had come to learn from the people in the barbershop how that made people feel. When you use those terms, it felt like you were dehumanizing that young man. And that young man made a very terrible mistake that morning. He took a stolen gun and he shot at a police officer. And the officer had to do what he had to do to protect himself and the other two officers on the scene. Right? But he was still a young man. And I had learned not to dehumanize him. And the other thing I did was I talked about the victims in this situation. Right? Because I said, we got to remember the victims that were involved in this incident. In that press conference, I said, we got to remember the grandmother and the 13-year-old little girl who woke up at 2 a.m. and found a man in their house they didn't know. And they'll live with those fears for a long, long time. It'll take them a long time to get over that. And there's the officer. He ended up having to do what he had to do. He didn't expect to do it that day. He didn't want to do it. And he'll live with that, frankly, for the rest of his life. He'll live with that, right? And that's a burden. And then the third victim, I said it's Shaquan Johnson's mom. Because Shaquan Johnson was 23 years old. He lived on his own. He was out on his own. His mom was asleep in bed when this happened. She did not do anything to deserve to lose the most precious thing she had, and that was her child. As a father, I get that, right? I get that. And I met her that morning, and I looked her in the eye because I felt like she deserved to see me look her in the eye and tell her that we were going to do the right thing. She deserved to hear that, right? As a mother, speaking from a father to a mother. And I wanted everybody to remember she's a victim. And I'd love to tell you I would have done those things because I'm a great guy. But the truth of the matter is I wouldn't have done those things. I'd have done it the way I'd seen it done in press conferences all across the country. And I'd have made the same mistakes that many of my peers have made in doing some of those things. But I didn't do it because the men and women in the barbershop, they taught me how to do it better. They taught me how to be a better police officer, a better police chief, but frankly, a better father, a better husband, and just a better man in general, right? And the beauty is the town of Cary spent no money to make that happen. It didn't cost anything. All it cost was our time. Taking time to get to know others, taking time to build relationships with people that are different than you. I had no way of knowing those things. I was never going to know those things because I didn't have the same life experiences as the men and women in the barbershop. They helped me understand, right? And I had to be in a relationship in order for them to do that. Because if I didn't walk in and have the uncomfortable conversations, they're never going to tell me those things. And that's the beauty of building relationships. It can completely change not just the relationship, but it can change so many other things about us. And that's been my experience. And that's why I think it's so incredibly valuable that we teach these lessons and help people understand the value in that relationship building with people that are different than you, whatever that difference might be. And so, True, that's where I'll just stop there. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my piece of that story.
No, thank you, Chief. And as Chief shared his portion of that story and his perspective and how it affected him, I've shared the lessons that I took away from my experience with JB when we first met, and so many more that I've learned along the way. But one of the most valuable lessons that I've learned from Chief's takeaway is the importance of not allowing our primary source about people, our primary source of information about people that don't look like us, to only come from people that look like us. As simple as that may sound, that was a revelation for me. And I think so many of us do it every day, because the majority of the people in our social circles and even oftentimes our professional circles look like us. And that's where our primary sources of information come from. So as a Black person in this country, if everything that I learn and believe about white people only comes from other Black people, I really need to check the source. If you're white in this country and everything that you learn, understand, or believe about Black people only comes from other white people, I would challenge you to check the credibility of that source. But the same thing applies across all areas of differences. If you are Asian and everything that you learn or think or believe about Hispanic people, if you are Hispanic and everything that you learn or think or believe about Black people, whatever the case may be, if you're a man, all of the information that you learn about women should not only come from other men. If you're a baby boomer, everything that you learn and think and believe about millennials should not come from other baby boomers only, right? We all have trusted information sources, as we should. But I've learned on this journey that just because an information source is a trusted information source, that is not the same thing as being a credible information source. And we need to be able to make that distinction. And I really became a student of empathy after that exchange with JB. And what I've learned about empathy is that there are 3 forms of empathy. And I think that is one of our most valuable tools and attributes when it comes to being a bridge builder, is empathy. And the 3 forms of empathy are cognitive empathy, which says, okay, I understand why you think the way that you think. It has not been my experience or my reality, but now that you've shared your story with me, I understand why you think the way that you think. Then there's emotional empathy, which says, I understand why you feel the way that you feel. And it's not that I am going to change my mind about my own life experiences, but now that I know what you've gone through, what you've lived through, what you've endured, I can understand why you feel the way that you feel. But it's that 3rd form of empathy. It's that 3rd level of empathy. That's compassionate empathy. And that's a combination of the 2, because sometimes just having that cognitive empathy is not enough, because now I'm just frustrated because I understand why you think the way that you think. And just having that emotional level of empathy is not always enough, because now I'm just carrying the same burden as you. I hurt because you hurt. But it's that compassionate empathy that compels us to take action. And that's a combination of the 2. And it compels us to take action to address whatever form of injustice or inequity or oppression or marginalization that we see impacting someone that we care about. Now we want to do something to change that situation, to change that circumstance. We realize and recognize that, hey, you know what? We are all different body parts of the same body. And if one part of that body is hurting, if one part of that body is in pain, if one part of that body is suffering, it affects the performance of the entire body. So I am going to do something to provide the healing necessary for that particular body part. That's what compassionate empathy does for us. So it's the cognitive empathy, it's the emotional empathy, and it's the compassionate empathy. But that is what compels us to take action to do something. But we only get that from a willingness to meet people where they are and hear their stories, and not being dismissive of other people's experiences and reality simply because they are not our own. We do that far too often because sometimes it sounds far-fetched because it's never happened to you. And I would even suggest that as we started this conversation, a couple of the gentlemen said, hey, that's not in my heart. Racism is not in my heart. The way I was raised and the way the life experiences that I had, that's not who I am. And I applaud that. So sometimes when that's not who you are, it's hard for you to understand that that does exist in other places. And not to speak for him, but I know that was Chief's reality when he and I first met. His entire career was at the Cary PD, and the Cary PD did not, the level of professionalism, because that department and agency did not operate that way, that it was hard for him to comprehend and understand that his peers in there, that he had peers in the profession and other places across the country that did operate that way. Because that was never in his heart. He never experienced that. He never saw that with the men and women that he served alongside for his 30-year career. So it was hard for him to wrap his mind around that this does happen in the profession that he loves. So it's about not being dismissive of someone else's experiences and realities just because they're not our own. So it is now 7:35. So what we'll do is we will take another quick 10-minute break. And when we come back, we'll open up the floor for any questions and comments that you all may have about what you've heard so far. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we are right at 7:45. Looks like we have most everybody back. Yep, looks like we've got everybody back. Not sure what happened to Chief, but we'll go ahead and keep it moving. So before there's the Chief. There he is. So before we move on to the next section of this discussion, we want to give you all an opportunity. We just want to check in, see how you all are doing. We know this 4 hours can be a long time, but you all are council members. You probably used to long extended meetings, right? So this is nothing new to you all, but we do want to have an opportunity to check in, see how you're doing, to see if anyone has any questions or comments or challenges. And we welcome you to challenge us on our experiences and what we've learned, because as we said, we don't have all the answers, but we are more than happy to share our experiences and lessons we've learned along the way. Mr. Miller, I think I saw your hand. I think you're muted.
Thank you. I thought I unmuted it. I just wanted to comment on Chief Godwin's story. It was very, very powerful, meaningful, and to grab a line from the Andy Griffith show, that one made me cry. It was great. Thank you.
No, thank you, sir. And look, I cannot say enough how blessed I am to have had the opportunities that I've had to kind of have these experiences. Because when I said early on that it changed my life, like that's not just words. It literally changed my life, right? What I do now is a direct reflection of the impact these experiences have had on me, right? And that's how significant it is. It literally changed what I do in life. Because when I'm not chief, the 2 years I was retired before I went back as interim chief for Apex, this is all I did because it was that impactful and it was that powerful. And I want others to have those experiences. So thank you for acknowledging that, because trust me when I tell you, they're not just words.
It's funny to me that a guy who gave me the look that he gave me when I suggested diversity training years and years ago is now my partner in crime. Well, I guess it's not really crime being you're a police chief and all, but but is now my partner in doing this work. That's pretty cool to me. Yeah, Mr. Bland, yes, sir.
Well, when the chief was telling his story about going down to the barbershop and about how he was afraid, but he said that, and was considering all the other things he'd done in his life, that he'd been trained for all those things, as far as like being trained, for SWAT team and for how to deal with narcotics people and all that kind of stuff. It raised a question in my mind that I've pondered about some, which is, I'm just concerned about the level of militarization that we've seen in police departments around the country, and that I'm worried or believe or suspect, I don't know which is the right word to use, that a lot of these guys who are in the police forces have been trained over in Afghanistan and trained in Iraq and places like that, where it's us against them, and you use a military style degree of force. And that, when they've come back to the United States and enter into police departments, when I was growing up, I would have never dreamed in a million years that a police officer would shoot somebody while they're running away. I mean, the thought of, if you're running away, they'll just get more cops and come and arrest you is what I figured that they would do. But now I think everybody's pretty much afraid of being shot. You know what I'm saying? Maybe it's because of all the stuff that you've seen in the news, but I wanted to get your take on that and what you thought about that.
Well, I think that I don't know statistically. I don't know what the breakdown is for police officers that have military training or military background versus those who don't. I'm not sure that statistic exists, but it's an interesting question, right? Anecdotally, I feel like most officers, at least the ones I know, right? So that's talking about just kind of regionally around where I live, being chief in Cary and Apex and knowing a lot of people in the agencies around us. I think there are far more police officers without military experience than what have military experience. But I do think that I think you started to see a change in the mindset of law enforcement, and if you're in law enforcement, you'll hear these terms. Moving to more of a guardian mindset, right? More of a instead of a warrior mindset. A lot of times you heard a lot of verbiage about a warrior mindset, and I know Commissioner Whitley heard quite a bit about that in Highway Patrol in their basic school. I know that the Highway Patrol very much kind of impress that upon you as a trooper, and particularly understanding how troopers work, right? You may be in Ashe County and your closest backup is 30 or 45 minutes away at best, right? And in Cary, we don't have that experience. My closest backup is 3 or 4 minutes away, right? That's stretching it if it takes 4 minutes to get somebody there for me. But I know a lot of our troopers and a lot of our, particularly sheriff's departments, it's a long ways away before you can get somebody there to back you up. And so I know there in the past there's been a warrior mindset where you've got to take this mindset that I'm going to survive, I am going to get through this, I am going to live, right, and very warrior like. And I think you've seen a shift from that moving towards a more guardian mindset, right, and more of a concept of like a sheepdog, right? A sheepdog is something that you hear a lot in law enforcement now, and it's drawing that analogy that our job is to protect the public, right? And there are times where the sheepdog's he's got to get pretty rough, right? All we got to do is remember Ralph and Sam from the cartoon days, right? Everybody remembers Ralph and Sam, right? When the coyote showed up, I don't know which was Ralph and which was Sam. Y'all might remember that, but whichever one the sheepdog was, he got down to business when the coyote showed up. But the rest of the time, he was pretty happy-go-lucky, right? He was just kind of chilling there with the sheep, and he was there as a guardian, right? So there were parts in time where I think in law enforcement you have to be a little bit of both, quite frankly, because let's face it, we can't ignore the fact that I think we are 100. We are 105 days into this year, and we've lost 103 police officers in this country in 105 days. I mean, the reality is police officers deal with a lot of ugliness, right? And we can't ignore that part of the equation as well. And so officers, unfortunately, the job they're tasked with doing, sometimes it's not pretty, right? And sometimes it's very ugly. But I think this change in mindset from a warrior mindset to a sheepdog mindset, right, or a protector mindset. I think that's the kind of change that law enforcement needs to have to better recognize our role in society. So I don't know if I answered you directly, but that's kind of the way I processed what you asked.
Have any idea as to, like, in these shootings that have taken place that have gotten such news coverage, the actual officers that are involved in the shootings, how many of those have been militarily trained? I'm just curious if there's any statistic on that.
Yeah, you know what? I don't know. Honestly, I've never even thought about that. So your question brings up I think a good question. I don't know that data exists. I don't know if anybody's ever looked at that, but it might be something that is worth looking at to see what that tells you. But I simply don't know. I have no idea.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Mr. Bland. I think it is, to Chief's point, a good question to see if there is any correlation there. I think that would be a great insight to determine, because if there is a correlation, maybe there's some way that could be addressed. All right, so I think that's a good question. Thank you. Yes, sir, Mr. Urban.
Well, there's a corollary to this, though. Maybe you could speak to this, that policing since the 70s has gotten better and better, more empathetic, more understanding. It's had its hands tied in some instances, but let's take 2019, for example. There were over 10 million, and this is all data that exists, there were 10 million arrests and incidences throughout the entire country. And I would like to know, is it the media? Is it political entities? Is it certain people in general that are hyping this up? But in 2019, there were 454 white people shot and killed, 242 blacks killed, 13 of those were unarmed. But if you look at the way things are reported today, you can't count 2020. What an anomaly in what's going on. But if you looked at 2018, 17, 15, 14, have progressively gotten better through law enforcement, and to have 10 million interactions and only 690 people shot, does that not say something? Because I'll be real honest, I'm tired of hearing that the police are out gunning for people. The statistics don't support that. Now, if you said there were 100,000 people shot, that's a big different story. But we're talking 690 out of 10 million interactions. So there's got to be something that you see as police officers and things like that things have been improving. Why is it being purported or derailed so vociferously? I can't pronounce that word.
Well, I'll give you my perspective, Commissioner Urban, and I think you make a great point. And I think to put a finer point on what you said, there's 10 million arrests, right? There's far more interactions than that. Right. The Bureau of Justice Statistics will tell you there's somewhere around 43 to 45 million interactions with police officers every year, right? But the stats you're quoting is 10 million arrests. Right. And so that's a very specific action inside of that 45 million interactions.
Right.
And I think what you point out is something that I have recognized in that what we kind of have two things we're dealing with here. And you kind of pointed out the facts, right? Those are facts. Those are numbers. Those are somewhat unequivocal. Right. That is information that is out there that has been gleaned from all the use of force reports. Right. The Washington Post did a study and showed what those numbers are, what those numbers of people that were shot, what the demographics were of those people, what the incidents were. They kind of took the self-defense ones right off the top, the ones where somebody was armed and actively trying to hurt the police officer or somebody else, a third party, right? And so the officer acted on that. Kind of take those out, and you're left with a much smaller number. And as you said, you came down to literally just a couple of handfuls over a period of time where you had 45 million interactions. So those are statistics, right? There's another side of this equation. Right. And the other side of the equation is the perception, right? How people are feeling. Right. And I have to recognize that those are kind of two ways in the world. There's facts and there's feelings, and they're two very different things. And what's also interesting is you can't fight one with the other. Right. If somebody's feeling a certain way, sometimes facts aren't really going to do anything to help that. And my example for that is, I often talk about the fact that Cary was recognized a couple of years ago as the safest city in America, the number one safest place to live. Statistically speaking, you could not live in a place that was more safe than Cary, North Carolina. However, there were some people that lived in Cary during that time period, that year, whose house got broken into. And guess what? They probably do not feel safe living in Cary, North Carolina. Now, if they said that, and then I ran over to their house and I go, hold on, look, let me show you the stats about how safe you are, right? That would have done zero good, right? Because stats and numbers are not what is driving how they feel, right? Their experience is what's driving how they feel, right? Not the statistics. And so my quoting the statistics aren't going to help. It's just simply not going to help in that situation. And I think you've got to deal with the way people are feeling so that they can be in a place so they're ready to hear some other information like the facts, right? And so and that's just my experience, right? I feel like you got to deal with the feelings. And look, it goes both ways, because right now, I tell you, cops are feeling pretty beat up.
Yeah.
right? And the vast majority of cops are in it for the right reason, and they're doing it the right way, and they have the right heart, right? And they're doing it with empathy and compassion and frankly, love for others, right? And they're willing to lay it all on the line, and they are getting beat up, right? And so they're feeling some kind of way. And I can say to them, guys, the vast majority of your community supports you. The vast majority loves you, right? But they're not hearing that because that's not how they're feeling right now because of the national narrative, right? Because of what's going on, what's getting the attention in the media and in social media, right? So they're feeling some kind of way. And what's interesting is that's exactly what's happening on the other side of that equation, right? There are members of our community that are feeling some kind of way, and the facts are irrelevant, right? And a lot of that, I think, to your point, can be traced back to the media and social media, right? And those algorithms that let you see the same kinds of stories and make it seem like something's happening every single day, when the reality is it's not, right? There are millions of incidents that nothing bad happens, but it feels like every single day bad things are happening, right? And so we got to deal with that feeling so that we can then introduce the facts into the situation. And so that's just kind of how I process it. I think that's what we're combating right now is our facts versus our feelings.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Mr. Urban. Great question. And to Chief's point, it's hard to fight feelings with facts until you've addressed how someone feels and why they feel that way. And from a cognitive standpoint, it's interesting is that the part of the brain that processes data, information, that's the only function that part of the brain delivers on. It doesn't have the capacity to do anything other than store and process the data and the information. The part of the brain that compels us to actually do something and take an action to behave a certain way is the part of the brain that controls our emotion. So it does matter how people feel. It does matter how we make people feel, because the part of the brain that controls behavior, action, activity to actually do something is the same part of the brain that controls emotion. So the part that stores the data, that's its only function. Hey, I've got the data. When you want to access it to determine what choice, decision, or action you will take, I'm here for you. But the part of the brain that controls how we feel, that controls our emotion, that is what drives us to actually do something. And so it is a bit of a dilemma, because I think a lot of times we want to say, well, hey, the facts say this, and that's valid. But if I'm afraid to fly, you can give me all the data in the world you want about how much safer it is to fly and how you're more likely to get into a crash or an accident in a car. And it's like, that's not going to get me to step on that plane. Right. And so, unfortunately, that is the world that we live in. But that's why I say empathy is so important. And as we're going to be bridge builders and building bridges across whatever area of division it is, whether it's a racial divide, a generational divide, a culture divide, a gender divide, a willingness to meet people where they are. And then we can help bring them along to where we know they need to be or we want them to be. But we first have to be willing. And I say willing with intention, because it's not our ability to do what other people can't do that's going to compel us to achieve greatness as bridge builders. Because we all have different skills and abilities and PhDs and LMNOPs and all of these fancy things that you all have achieved in your life. And so, but your ability to do what other people can't do will not lend itself to your greatness as a bridge builder. It's your willingness to do what other people won't do. It was Chief's willingness to walk through the doors of that barbershop that day. It was JB's willingness to showcase and exercise empathy when I walked through the doors of the Cary PD that day. It's your willingness to meet people where they are that's going to lead to our greatness as a collective. in the bridges that we're able to build and the material in which those bridges are built. Because storms are going to come. We are going to experience adversity, even as we are dedicating our lives to being bridge builders. Storms are still going to come. That's inevitable. The question then becomes, how strong is your bridge? Is it a straw bridge that will just collapse at the first gust of wind? Or maybe it's a wood bridge that can take a little more of adversity, but maybe will collapse in the midst of a hurricane or an earthquake. But if it's that reinforced steel bridge that you use the right material, that you've contributed all levels of empathy, grace, and understanding as the materials to building your bridge, then it will be able to withstand any adversity or storm that comes your way. And so it really gets to an understanding of the tools that we're using as we are committing and dedicating ourselves to being bridge builders. And we talked a lot about race, but that is not the only form of diversity. We talked a lot about race because it's relevant with the climate that we're in right now. And I think we all could agree. And it was at the origin of Chief's and I's relationship was rooted in race, but our journey has allowed us to expand our bridge building efforts far beyond just the division of a racial divide, although that there's a need for that. And I think one of the questions that was asked, I think, Mr. Higdon, you said one of the things that you thought a good diversity training should include is helping people understand why diversity, equity, and inclusion even matters. And so we want to share this with you all really quickly and just talk about why it's important, why it matters. And here's one of the reasons is we are living in a time in our world history where our society is the most diverse it's ever been. America is the most diverse it's ever been. And so it behooves us to embrace the diversity that is available to us. Diversity is such a gift, and it's a gift that's available to all of us. And the more we're able to embrace the diversity that's available to us, the better off we'll be, because we are, as cliche as it sounds, we are better and stronger together. For the first time, we are seeing 5 different generations existing in the workplace. So there's the generational diversity from traditionalists or matures through baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and Gen Z. Hispanics are the largest ethnic minority in America. African Americans are the largest racial minority in America. Asian Americans are the fastest growing ethnic minority in America. In 2019, the data suggests that minority purchasing power has exceeded $3.9 trillion. And so now we're 2 years later from this study, and it's probably higher than that. People with disabilities represent over 61 million people in our country. The LGBTQ plus community is estimated to be anywhere between 15 and 17 million, and some studies have it higher than that. Women-owned and women-owned business are the fastest growing segment in America. So this is a snapshot of the society that we live in and the municipality that you represent. So this is a snapshot of the larger society, but on a more macro level, this is a reflection of the municipality that you all represent as well, is the levels of diversity that are growing at a rapid rate. So this is why it is important that we embrace and apply the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion so that we are all the best leaders, the best servants that we can be to the diverse communities that we have been called to serve. Having an understanding of how do we effectively meet these different people groups where they are, knowing that there are differences, and it's okay that there are differences. That's part of the gift and the richness of diversity, is that it allows us to be able to see and approach challenges and problems and issues through diverse perspectives. And it's through those diverse perspectives that allows us to be much more innovative and creative in our problem solving. So here's one reason why DE&I matters to us. And then here's another reason, just to give you some data points from a racial ethnic standpoint, a gender diversity, and a generational diversity standpoint. Companies that are in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity on their leadership teams are 36% more likely to have financial returns above their national industry, above their competition. Now, I know that this isn't a for-profit institution that you have, but however you measure your success and your productivity and your performance, racial and ethnic diversity at a leadership level greatly contributes to that. It's not suggesting that it is the causation, but there is a strong correlation to organizations that have more diversity in their success. Companies that are in the top quartile for gender diversity in their executive or leadership teams are 25% more likely to have greater returns than their counterparts. So this speaks to the importance of gender diversity. Then from a generational diversity standpoint, close to 70% of our millennial and Gen Z counterparts agree that they are more likely to stay 5 or more years in an organization if they're working for an employer that is perceived, going back to what Chief suggested, perceived to have a more diverse workforce. And so now this addresses the importance of not only recruiting, but retention. So it's going to be hard to recruit and retain top talent if they do not perceive that you are an organization that celebrates diversity. So here are some reasons as to why diversity, equity, and inclusion matter and are important. And then some of the less quantifiable data points are studies show that it delivers on greater employee engagement the more diverse your organization is. It shows improved productivity and increased profitability, the greater levels of diversity. Once again, not causation, but correlation. So here are just a few reasons as to why diversity, equity, and inclusion are important in your organizations or institutions. And so the question that I'd like to have a discussion around with this group really quickly is, how are we even defining diversity? And I'd just like to just really quickly, just a couple of people, just raise your hand and toss out your definition, because we should have a baseline of understanding that we're all on the same page with how we're even defining diversity. So how would you define diversity?
Let me Google it.
I mean, I would say, starting with racial and ethnic diversity to gender identity, neurodiversity, differing abilities, covering the spectrum of people living in the community together.
No, I love it. Right. And there are 3 forms of diversity, and you touched on all of them. There's identity diversity, what we see, right? When we see someone, the identity that we see, whether it's black, white, male, female, old, young, their identity diversity. And then there is experiential diversity. We all have very diverse life experiences, and that's based on levels of education, geography, parenting styles, major societal events that we've gone through. So there's experiential diversity. And then there's the neurodiversity, or the cognitive diversity that you touched on. And that is simply how we think, our different thinking styles, how we approach problem solving, right? And the real value is in that neurodiversity, that cognitive diversity. But we can't treat that independent of the other 2 forms of diversity, because it is our identity diversity that influences our experiential diversity. So simply because I am a black male, I am going to be required to navigate life differently than someone that is a white female or an Asian female, or even a white male for that point. And as a white female is going to have to navigate life differently than me as a black male, because of how society views that identity that you represent. It requires us, it almost forces us to have different life experiences because of the projections that society has placed on that identity. And then it's that experiential diversity that informs our neurodiversity, which is why we view the world through the lens in which we view it. We've been conditioned to see life through a certain lens, and then we have different ways of thinking and approaching problem solving. So although that neurodiversity is among the most valuable because we benefit from the diverse thinking styles and perspectives that can contribute to thought, solutions, and ideas. It's not disconnected. It's very linked, although it's distinct, it's still linked to our identity diversity and our experiential diversity. And so those forms of diversity are spot on that you just articulated. The diversity by definition is the state of being different. That's it. It's the state of being different, whatever those differences may be, right? And what I find interesting about that definition of diversity is it is a state of being. It doesn't do anything on its own. Diversity on its own doesn't do anything. You could have the most diverse organization, the most diverse city, town, municipality, department, team. But if you don't leverage that diversity, you will not experience the benefit of the gift of that diversity. It is a state of being. It doesn't do anything on its own. Now, inclusion, by definition, is the act of making someone feel a part of. Inclusion is the act. That's the action that we take. That's where we all come in, is leveraging the diversity that is available to us. And then what actions are we taking to make sure everyone feels included? No one feels excluded or marginalized. Everyone feels comfortable to show up as their authentic selves. But too often, we aren't as inclusive as we could be or as we should be when it comes to people that are different than us. So I'd like to get your thoughts at this point, and let's have a quick conversation around why you believe that is the case, just as a society, just as people. Like, why do you think we aren't as inclusive? I mean, we see the levels of division that are going on across the country right now. Why do you think we aren't as inclusive as we could be or as we should be when it comes to others, whoever others may be? Mr. Whitley.
Yeah. One of the things that I learned out early in the highway patrol, and they broke me in all the way from being racist and segregated, not feeling a part, and a whole 9 yards. But I learned out early, in order to make a difference, that you had to be part of the team and with some authority, power, being in a position that you can treat people under you not like the people treated you that were over you. Mm-hmm. So that's why I got in the promotion system and moved up to sergeant. I had 6 officers under me as sergeant, moved up to first sergeant. I had 9, and then lieutenant. I had 10 counters and captains. I had 9 counters and 300 some employees. But I knew not to treat them the way I was treated. And so in order for you to make a difference, I had 2 ladies, female troopers, under my watch as a captain. And these 2 young ladies was feeling what I was feeling when I came on. And I pulled them both in. They were both out of Winston-Salem. And I pulled them in, and I knew that they were been catching it pretty rough, being a female trooper back in the early 80s. And I had a good conversation with them, and I told them to go to work, and I'll make sure. And I called the first sergeant there and told him I want to make sure that they were not mistreating these 2 ladies. And those were smart girls, and they were real smart. And I put them in position for training and different stuff, and started getting them in the promotion system. And those girls really proved themselves. And they were white girls, because it wasn't there was one black female on at that time. She was in Charlotte. But at the same time, these 2 young girls proved themselves. They needed somebody over them that understood diversity, mm-hmm. and understood what making a difference in different positions and showing that they could do the same thing as the white male was doing. But I'm proud that these 2 girls went and celebrated. I was a captain. Both of them exceeded me after I retired. One was a major, one is a lieutenant colonel in the highway patrol. And I'm very proud of that. They oftentimes call me back. But so when I became a commissioner in Matthews, I looked around, and what I saw was that there was no diversity in the town of Matthews, in the police department. Certainly that was a part that I looked at. And then the chief and I started having conversation. But when you look around in Matthews, it's all white men and white female. Very few, and these are statistics, but at the same time, this board knows I've always talked about equality. And I know that in order for you to talk about it, you got to get people's attention to understand what I see through black eyes. When you walk through our town, there's no people of color within the rank. And I say this because I believe that in order for you to change, you got to be part of the team. And I'm part of this team. But when I speak, I'm speaking because it's not just a black thing that I see, because y'all see the same thing. So we have to make sure that we are inclusive in our diversity, not just talking about it, but actuality. When you look around, especially no black females in a position. I think we just now got one black female on the police department that's come on. We had one sergeant, but she retired. And there's a black female in the telecommunication part. But if you walk around our town hall, you see no people of color there. And that's disturbing to me as a black man, when even though I know that Matthews is making up of 82% of Caucasian and 13% of people of color, the next highest, then Hispanic is somewhere around 9%. But there should be some kind of inclusion that make up that you ought to be able to see some people of color. And you just cannot keep turning your head and act like it's not there. The reality is there. And we have an opportunity to make a difference. But you said something true. You got to do some action. You can't just talk about diversity, but you got to make a conscious effort to say, look, I see this. It's not equal. And I think I know John and Jeff will hear me say, and a lot of John Urban and Jeff Miller hear me say, because they're the old one, just give us a piece of pie. You old John Urban.
I didn't say it, John. I just so you know, I didn't say it.
Yeah, but it's just a piece of pie in diversity and being fair and equitable to all. And that's all I'm asking, because see, I know what the flip side is about. I know what it is because I've been there and I've been in leadership, and I made sure and try my best to make sure that my team is diverse in people, so we got difficult. Because I run a business at my church, a daycare. Now I have a Hispanic woman from Cuba. I have 3 white ladies there that does a wonderful job, and I have a diverse group of people from 26 years old up to 62 years old. That's part of that team, but they bring different stuff, and you got to listen to them and hear what makes them and what brings things about for them.
No, thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Whitley. And I heard a number of valuable nuggets that you shared. And one is we have to be willing to step outside of our comfort zone. I think things stay the way that they are because, if I'm hearing you correctly, people are comfortable. And if it doesn't affect them directly, then there's no motivation to affect change. So we have to be willing to step outside of our comfort zone. And then the next piece that's connected to that, it goes back to empathy, as you talked about, hey, you're not a female, but you know what it's like to feel marginalized. So you took it upon yourself as a leader to create opportunities and open doors for those that you knew were probably experiencing some feelings of exclusion or marginalization. And so you leveraged your position, your power, and your privilege to create opportunities for others. And so in that case, you were serving as an ally because you weren't female, but you had the ability to serve as an ally to create opportunities. So it's the importance of, so if I'm hearing you, obstacles, to go back to the question, that prevent us from being as inclusive as we could be or as we should be, it's comfort, lack of empathy, and maybe even lack of understanding of what it's like for someone to be in that position of marginalization. So these are some obstacles that, if I'm hearing you correctly, that could prevent us from being more inclusive.
True. I was in a diversity, this color of compromise, and a white ex-leader of the town of Matthews shared something with me. He said, Larry, there's black leadership and there's white leadership. But the difference is black leadership don't have no power in Matthews. Now, this is coming from a white man, this ex-employee, and he spoke truth to that, because I think what happens is that when white leaders are empowered, and that's the word, they're empowered, they hate to lose that power because they've been doing this the way they want to for so long, they don't want to share or change. That's the word I'm looking for. They don't want to change.
So fear of change is another obstacle that you think.
Yes.
So fear of change. Okay. No, this was good. So I appreciate that. Anyone else on what do you think are obstacles that prevent us from being as inclusive as we could be, or as we even should be? Yeah, Mr. Bland.
I sort of struggle with this myself in my law firm, some of my other businesses that I've run. I've killed myself trying to hire women, particularly, and women of color and people of color. It has been an extremely difficult thing to do. I don't know why it is. Maybe they don't want to come live in Matthews. I don't know. But you wouldn't think women would feel that way. We have had a very difficult time, but we have. And we've hired them, and they stay a couple of years. And, we've had partners that have been women, and it's just been a more difficult. It costs more to hire, and they're harder to find, and they don't stay as long. So those are all difficult issues that we've had. And I don't think that, I think we're bending over backwards to try to, I think we've had, I told one of the ladies just left and went to another law firm, but we had more women in the firm than we did men. You know what I'm saying? And partners, but I don't know how do you, how can you can't pay people more. Well, I guess you can pay people more money to come here it's an odd situation. I don't know. But that's the problem that I've had in trying to hire and keep and retain attorneys and staff. It's been that difficult. And you wouldn't think it would be. You think Matthews would be a place where they'd want to be. I don't know why.
So the obstacle that I'm hearing there is access to diversity. And then right is
access. And the lady that I hired a lady who was a great out of Wake Forest, a black lady that came and was an associate. We got along great. She moved to Washington, D.C. I wrote her a letter of recommendation for the firm she went to work for up there. But I don't know. Maybe it's just Matthews is not some place they won't live. I don't know. But anyway, life's strange.
Okay, so access to diversity. And then even in how. So there's fear. There's clarity of how. Right. And then there is access to diversity, or some of the obstacles that prevent us from being more inclusive. I just want to make sure I'm capturing all of this correctly.
But is what Larry's saying one of the reasons that what we're talking? He was saying, when you walk around downtown, you're right. And I've noticed that too. You don't see very many African Americans, black people walking around downtown, milling around in downtown Matthews on Friday and Saturday night. Why is that? I don't know.
Well, my experience has taught me that there's a clear distinction between recruiting and retention. And I think we put more effort, we're much more proactive into our recruiting efforts in recruiting diverse talent. And we're much more reactive to fostering cultures of inclusion that will help retain them. And when I say that, what I mean is, it's the culture of inclusion that helps the retention. So once you get someone of a diverse background into an organization, a municipality, association, the culture that they enter will determine whether or not they feel comfortable enough, welcomed enough, included enough to stay. And so putting as much energy and effort into fostering cultures and climates of inclusion as we put into the recruiting will help with that entire process of recruiting and retention. And when I say we're typically more reactive to inclusive cultures, is it's not until there is a sexual harassment charge that we will do sexual harassment training. We're reactive. It's not until there is a racial discrimination accusation that we will do cultural competency or diversity training. We're reactive. And so it's about being more proactive in fostering cultures of inclusion and having those courageous conversations, because we're uncomfortable talking about race. We're uncomfortable talking about sexual discrimination or sexual harassment. We're uncomfortable talking about sexual orientation, LGBTQ. We're uncomfortable talking about these things. So because we're not talking about them, we often don't even understand what the real attitudes, needs, opinions, drivers, and influencers are of these diverse people groups to even know what a comfortable and inclusive environment looks like and feels like for them. So being more being more proactive and intentional about having those uncomfortable conversations will help, because the person that is closest to a challenge or an issue or feelings of marginalization are the ones best positioned to help identify what the solution should be. And so if we are a dominant majority of all men or all white or all black, and we are gathering together to come up because we're the ones in leadership, and we're talking amongst ourselves about how we are going to foster a more inclusive culture, but not including the voices of those who are closest to the feelings and the sting of marginalization, again, we're not tapping into the most credible information source to help guide us in how to do that.
Yeah, and true. One thing I've learned over in my course of being in the highway patrol is that if you don't have a person of diverse in the upper ranks, and say if they're all white men, and when they make the decision for the town, it's an all-white decision made, but you didn't get that black person or the Hispanic person input in the decision of what they thought or what the feelings, so you can look at that. And so when you look at all of that comes around, then when you made those decisions of who I'm going to promote, how we're going to promote, how we're going to hire, and I was in recruiting. I was one of my job in the highway patrol. I was a recruiter. I didn't just recruit blacks, but I recruited females, Hispanic. I went out because at that particular time, as I shared with y'all earlier, there was 1,600 state troopers, and if I was number 18, so the pool was real low. So I had a task of doing that, but the highway patrol realized that we had to make a difference. This is not who we want to be, even though this might be who we are now. But we had to make a difference and start recruiting, and not just talking about recruiting, but actually going out and recruit and try to fill some spots so that when decisions are made at the top, I know me being a black commissioner, I heard a lot of times that, like when I first got here, they did not recognize Martin Luther King as a holiday. But once I spoke it out and everybody talked about it, I was thinking, nobody had recognized it. But what I come to find out is Matthews was the only town that did not recognize Martin Luther King as a holiday, but everybody else around us did. That hurt me as a black man. And I brought it out, and John was a commissioner and Jeff was a commissioner at that time. And so once I put it out, it voted all seven of us voted to make Martin Luther King a holiday. And I asked, well, why you had never done it before now? And the response was, nobody never asked us about.
They just never thought about it. And that's the challenge with the I'm sorry, Mr. Whitley. I mean,
That's right. You're right. And that's what's happening now. If I had not have been there, I'm not sure Martin Luther King would be a holiday today, but now the town honors that. The town took that in within itself and support that and sponsor that. And I'm glad of that, but there are some more areas because I'm saying this, and this is not nothing new to none of these on this board. I've said this, and I'm saying it out of love and caring because I'm part of this team as a commissioner. And if I can't see and tell and share with my brothers and sisters here, being candid of what I see, and if I open their eyes and then they go look and say, well, Whitley's right. It ain't, and just like Dave said, you go downtown Matthews is a great town. I'm telling you, John, I'm commending you for bringing the downtown of Matthews alive, the businesses, because if you ride across America, most downtown small towns are dead. That's not Matthews. But Dave, in response to what you're saying, no black people now, they come out and I see blacks at the pizza place to get pizza. But the downtown Matthews is not conducive, or there's nothing really there to bring black people out to. That makes sense to you, Dave? What
do we need to do? That's what I'm trying to figure out. What do we need to do?
And I think it's the access. And I think to Whitley's point, if we use that example that he shared about being a voice that can bring a perspective, because more often than not, it's no malicious intent when people feel marginalized or discriminated against or feelings of oppression. A lot of times there's no malicious intent. There was just never that representative voice to help educate those that are in the dominant majority to understand how that is impacting different audiences. And so what we call kind of these equity qualifier questions is always asking ourselves to look at things through an equity lens when we are making choices and decisions, particularly choices and decisions that a group like this makes that affects an entire community. And asking ourselves, okay, is there any specific people group that will benefit more than others by this decision that we're making? Is there any specific people group who will be more challenged than others by this decision that we're making? That is a qualifying question to help make sure we're always looking at things through an equity lens. And if there are not people of the diverse people groups that are present, proactively seek out that input and perspective to be your checks and balances. Because where there's little to no inclusion, then there's going to be little to no commitment, because the feeling is that you don't care. And that's not always the case, but that will be the perception. And as Chief and someone else pointed out earlier, we don't know what we don't know. And so having those conversations and tapping into the rich diversity of resources and information that are available to you to help inform those decisions is never a bad choice to make. Not that you're allowing that to dictate the choices and decisions, but it's just giving you more, you're more informed as to how the choices and decisions could have an impact. And one it's not really that small example. One example that I'll use is a long-lasting implication of the Brown versus Board of Education decision to integrate schools, as celebrated of a decision as it is. And many of us probably would have made the same decision had we been in a position to make it at the time. What I don't think was factored in was the long-term implications. There is a reason that 1% of educators in our nation are Black males. And it is a long-term implication of integration. So when there was segregation, the profession of educator, of teacher, was a highly celebrated and noble profession that was dominated by Black males in the Black schools and in the Black communities. The majority of the teachers and educators were Black male. When integration took place, meaning the schools came together, now in the white schools, the majority of the teachers were white female. And so once the integration took place, you no longer needed all of the teachers. So the teachers that were removed were the teachers from the Black schools, and they kept a select few. And that is how today we're still seeing the long-term implications of that. Is the dominant majority of teachers and educators in our country are white female and 1% Black male, because we removed them from the profession. And that was not, I don't believe that was intentional, but that was an unintended consequence of that decision, as great of a decision as it is. But had we processed that through an equity filter at the time, maybe some different decisions and some adjustments would have been made if that voice would have been factored in to the decision-making process. And so I say all that to say, leverage the diverse voices that are available to you in the decisions that are being made, and that will help us understand how it will impact and affect the different people groups that we've been given stewardship over. And it is now 8:40, now 8:41 just clicked. So we'll take our final 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll bring it home strong.
All right.
Larry.
Yes.
Bark at me, Papa. Sorry, man. I was going to ask you, I couldn't really say a minute ago, but what do you think would bring more people, downtown?
Well, the thing that draws the blacks is down in there is the eateries. I know Heckle and Jive, Heckle and Hyde is a good eating place, and the pizza, right there on the corner. I think those are the two, but like when you got Stomptown there, you have a great deal of people of color coming out for Stomptown, but a lot of them come from out of town too,
What about the place that next to what used to be BD&T? Does that attract many folks, or I think that place?
The barbecue place.
What's it called? I never remember its name.
Max Speed Shop.
Yeah.
Yes, Max.
Mac.
I don't think many blacks hang out there, Dave.
Larry, what we need is a black barbershop.
Yeah, that's right.
We got a black barber shop in Matthews.
Where is it?
You go to church. It's right behind the service station, right there on the corner, right across where the Exxon used to be, in that little shopping plaza back there. It's a black barber shop there.
Oh, Ovations, I think is what it's called, right?
Yeah, I think you're right.
It is located where?
Huh?
Where is it located?
Right in the shopping center. It's a little complex behind.
It's the center across from Stumptown Park.
It's right there on Trace.
They have like a pharmacy, like a special pharmacy there.
Right in there somewhere. But it's a black-owned barber. He go to church. I've talked to him several times. But Trent, you talking about barbers? My barber and I was in college together at A&T. He used to cut my hair when I was at A&T. And we both left Greensboro. We both live here in Charlotte. He got his own barber shop now. And when I had some hair, he used to cut my hair. But you're right. That's good conversation. You get everything you want in the black barber shop.
I was going to say I've never been to a black barbershop, but I've seen all the Ice Cube movies. They're pretty good. They're pretty funny.
Yeah. Pretty accurate too. Yeah, but that's one place where you could get some good ideas as to answer that question, Mr. Bland, of what are some things we could do. The thoughts and ideas are there. If you have a discussion session in the barbershop, a rap session, and get some of those ideas. Some of the things that we've seen work is noticing that a lot of people in a certain town were going to the bigger city, whether it's a Raleigh or a Durham or a Charlotte, for major events. It's because their town didn't celebrate those events, whether it's a Juneteenth or an MLK celebration. And so starting a committee of community members and leaders to be part of the planning committee for that Juneteenth celebration, for that MLK celebration. So knowing that because they are active participants in the planning of it, they're going to develop and contribute ideas that will be attractive to that audience, and they will serve as advocates and spokespeople for the event to recruit others to attend. So those are some things that we have seen work in response to the question that you asked, is identifying leaders in the community, trusted voices of the community, to serve as members of a planning committee to help, okay, we want to recognize and celebrate Juneteenth. We need your help to do that. We want to recognize and celebrate in our town, so the people in our town don't feel as though they have to go somewhere else to get the cultural connectivity and the cultural relevance that they seek.
Well, I was telling Dave that Matthews Alive does that, to bring people and of all colors downtown to a festival celebration. That really is one of our biggest cultural diversity entertainment that we have here in Matthews. Every year, we couldn't do it last year because of COVID, but
pandemic.
Yeah, a lot of those, a lot of the vendors are people of color.
Yeah.
Well, good.
All right, so
build on that.
Now, I want to say this one thing that this Chief Pennington does is once a year he goes around, and him and the fire department go around to different communities in the town of Matthews. I think they make 3 or 4 stops, and they come to the Black church, my church, and they come and meet with my congregation, and they ask us. I like that because they asked us what could they do, or what are they doing, or how do they feel like that the police department doing, Chief. And he's doing what he's thinking out of the box, and he's doing an excellent job because he has got a recruiting program. And he put out a letter a couple of days ago with the George Floyd verdict in. And he felt like he needed to respond for his police department. And so he called me, being an ex-police officer and a pastor, and he wanted my input and asked me would I proof the letter he wanted to put out. And I told him, sure, shoot it to me. He shot it to me. I read him. I said, Chief, you're hitting all the point. I said, not only are you hitting the point, but they feel you in this statement that you're sincere, not just blowing smoke, but you're sincere about your department, and you want your department to look diverse and to be part of the times that we're living in now. He did a wonderful job, and so I know that he's doing a wonderful job, but there are some other areas that need to catch on board and do those as well too. Just the times we live in 2021 now. You know, I fought this thing back in 75. I shouldn't be fighting this thing still in 2021. I'm getting an old man now. I'm the oldest commissioner. I can say this. I am the oldest commissioner. You coming up behind me, Dave. You won't be 69 to all. Okay. But Jeff Miller is up there as well too.
Sneaking up. Jeff Miller sneaking up on.
Yeah. But I'm committed to making this town better. I love it. I've been here 33 years, and I'm part of this team. I want us to see us to be, Jim Taylor, you say, the best town in the whole country. I want us to be that best town in the whole country.
Well, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Why not, right? No reason why you shouldn't be.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, what I want to do at this point is I want to pass the mic back over to my buddy, my brother, and my friend, Chief Anthony Lamont Godwin, and he's going to walk us through an exercise. I believe you call it, Chief, what the danger of a single story, or the danger of the single story, to help us understand how to be more mindful of our unconscious bias and how that affects how we show up and how we behave towards others, with the understanding that it's not an indictment on any of us. We all have it. But I don't want to steal your thunder, Chief, but I love this exercise that you lead on the danger of a single story and how that applies to all of our lives and helps us to be more mindful of it in our day-to-day interactions with others, whoever others may be for us. So I'll set up the slide for you if you want to set up the exercise.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, True. So, so this comes from a TED Talk. There's a young lady that does a TED Talk, really excellent TED Talk overall. And today we want to show just a brief snippet of that, less than 5 minutes of it. So it's not going to be a long video, but a short video where she talks about the danger of a single story. And when you say single story, talking about making assumptions about people based on a singular trait, right? A singular thing. So it might be where they're from. It might be what they look like. It might, whatever the single piece of information that you have, making assumptions about what that means, assigning some kind of value based on that very limited information. And she does a really good job of demonstrating being on both sides of that equation. So what I want to do is I want us to watch this first, and then I want to ask for a couple of folks to step out there and be willing to share a time where they've been single-storied, where perhaps you found yourself in this situation and you have been faced with kind of that being put upon you as well. So first, let's watch this again, less than 5 minutes. Let's check this out, and then we'll talk about it on the backside.
I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I will say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways, I think of myself now as African, although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country, the most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about their charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. I would see Africans in the same way that I, as a child, had seen Fide's family.
Oh, couldn't get off unmute there. Sorry about that. So, yeah, I really like that piece, because I think what that piece does is it shows us the reality for all of us. And that is that I believe every single person, certainly in this room, and just every single person finds themselves on both sides of the single story, right? She talked about how she was guilty of single storying that young man early in her life, right? And then she talked about when she went to college, how she got single storied. And so I think that's the reality of kind of the human condition. Although we don't like for people to make assumptions about who we are based on a single trait, we'll still find ourselves doing it, right? And I think it's important to recognize that we're all kind of susceptible to that to some extent, and recognize when it's happening, right? Because what's important is that you recognize it's happening so that you can do something about it. And so I don't mind sharing with you that one of the more recent times where I found myself being guilty of putting somebody else in that single story mode. And it concerns, and what's interesting about this is I did it just a couple of years ago while I was actively engaged in doing this work in diversity and inclusion, right? While I teach these things, I still found myself guilty of doing this, really without even thinking about it. And then as I thought about it, I realized that I had done exactly that. And so the situation is there's a band called Five Finger Death Punch. Anybody ever heard of the band Five Finger Death Punch? Yeah, so the mayor's heard of Five Finger Death Punch. I believe that's it. Nobody else raised their hand. So Five Finger Death Punch is I don't know if you would call it heavy metal or hard rock band, but I would call it one of those two things. And it's not my kind of music. But I remember for whatever reason, I saw an image of this band, and I want to show you the image that I saw. And I'm not real technically, I don't have a lot of technological prowess, so I'm just going to go old school here and hold a picture on my phone up to the camera so you can see it. So this isn't going to be the best in the world, but you can see kind of these band members. And so let me blow this guy up. I mean, these are pretty gnarly looking guys. They got neck tats. You see that guy? He's got long dreads. They got sleeve tattoos. And look, like this is as gnarly as it gets. Look at this guy. He has got not just dreads, he's got a beard that's dreaded. I mean, that's as gnarly as you can get. When you start dreading a beard, man, that's like serious gnarl factor right there, right? Yeah. And so I saw this picture and I remember thinking, that is probably not a bunch of guys that would really like me as a police officer, right? I remember thinking they're probably not fans of law enforcement. And then I got to learn a little something about them. And somebody shared some information about them and recommended that I go look up some of their music and some of their music videos. And when I did that, I found that they are incredibly supportive of military and law enforcement. And as a matter of fact, they've got a couple of music videos that are very much, were filmed in support of law enforcement. And as a matter of fact, their drummer, one of those guys in that picture, their drummer, quit the band just last year to become a full-time police officer in Las Vegas and is a reserve police officer in his home state of Indiana. And when I learned those things, I realized I had done exactly what we shouldn't do. And that is, I made assumptions on those guys based on things like their tattoos, based on things like their hair, right? Based on things like the kind of music they play, right? I was guilty of that. And I think that is something that we can all kind of relate to it, because I think everybody falls into that trap. But what I wanted to do now is ask for some volunteers to share a story with us about a time where you've been single storied. I don't necessarily want you to do like me and give examples of when you have done that, right? But I know this as well. All of us have been single storied, right? As a law enforcement officer, every cop gets single storied. Happens all the time, like we talked about earlier, right? Everybody, oh, you're a cop. I'm going to make some assumptions about what that means about who you are, right? And really, it couldn't be further from the truth, oftentimes. So if there's anybody brave enough to share with the group a time where you've been single storied, and I want you to think about it in terms of some very specific questions like, how did it make you feel? Why do you think it happened? How did you respond? And was it true? Because sometimes the single story is true, but probably not for the reasons that the person thinks it is, right? And so do we have anybody that's willing to give us an example of a time where you've been single storied?
I'd like to share a quick story. I used to work for a fairly large corporation. I was the head of engineering, and we had 40 or 50 engineers, and we hired this one gentleman who was from upstate South Carolina. He happened to be black, and he spoke so incredibly poorly that sometimes when customers or vendors would speak to him, they say, I can't even understand what this guy's saying. And I started questioning myself if I made a really bad mistake hiring this guy. He can barely talk. I don't know how he got an engineering degree. This guy's really not that bright. So later on, we were, I'll call this gentleman, I won't give his real name, I'll call him Jonathan. Later on, we had to do some very difficult computational fluid dynamics, really like PhD level stuff. And none of our engineers, including myself, had any clue how to do this. And so one of the managers came to me and said, we got this project done. And I said, well, who did it? Did we have to hire a consultant? He says, oh, no, Jonathan did it. You know, the guy that I thought really wasn't that bright. So I called him into my office. I said, wow, you know how to do this? And I said, you know, you really need to work on how you speak, because you don't present yourself real well in front of our customers. And he said, should you like that I speak with an English accent then? You know, and he spoke perfect in another way. So this guy, I don't know, I had totally misjudged him. He ended up being probably one of the brightest engineers out of 50 that we had. And for whatever reason, he just liked the kind of sloppy in how he spoke, but he was incredibly intelligent. So I will admit that I misjudged him. I thought I'd made a mistake in hiring him. He ended up being one of the brightest guys and contributed quite a bit to our organization. So I didn't know him well enough to make that judgment that I was making beforehand.
No, thanks, Mayor. That's a great example, right? And thanks for being vulnerable enough to share a story when you were the guilty party, right? You were the one that was single storying someone. And you know, did you ever did the two of you ever talk about what the impact was of that conversation? Did he ever let on or tell you kind of how that made him feel when you did that?
We ended up becoming great friends. He moved on and became, you know, a leader in the engineering field for another corporation. But I don't know if it was just kind of a ruse that he was doing with the way he was talking or what. But he had a lot of people fooled. But I think we ended up really respecting each other. And I don't know. We ended up becoming we're still good friends.
Yeah. No, that again, great example, and it just illustrates, you know, the perils of making assumptions about and assigning value about who somebody is based on a single trait. There was so much that you didn't know about who Jonathan was and what he was capable of, right? You made some assumptions, even to the point where, as you admitted, did I make a mistake? Should I have not hired this guy?
And we all know what happens when we assume, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the reality was he could do things that nobody else in your firm could do, right? By your own admission, you and everybody else is like, I don't know how to do it. Like, look, you said fluid dynamics or something. I don't even know what that means. Like, not only can I not do it, I don't even know what it means, right? But Jonathan could do it. And that's the peril, right? In that you would have missed out on the gift that is Jonathan had you kind of gone with that assumption, and even taking it to the extent of dismissing him because of the assumptions that you were making based on something as simple as the way he talked. And
for many years afterwards, he would always tease me by speaking with this incredible, articulate diction, just perfect, being kind of sarcastic when he was in my presence, but great guy, really smart. And I totally one-storied him for sure.
Yeah, no, great example. Thanks so much for the vulnerability there. Like I said, sharing that side, you being on that side of that story. How about somebody else? Anybody else willing to share a time where you've been single storied? Yes, Mr. McCool.
Well, I made the bold choice at age 21 to run for public office. So that usually that caused a lot of single storying in my early career. Folks easily dismissed me because I was a younger guy, and So I still fight through that, but especially early on, that was definitely, you dismiss me as the video game playing snot-nosed kid who doesn't know how to do anything. And so I've, you have to work to kind of work a little hard to prove that wrong, especially, as an age. And we talked about generational stuff. So I guess that was a time I've been single storied.
So when that happened to you, when you realized that was the vision of who you are that people had, how did you respond to that?
In a way, it was almost expected, but I mean, it obviously doesn't make you feel the best, but it motivated me to try all the harder to kind of prove it wrong and prove that I'm more than just a now 22-year-old who I know a lot more and have a lot more life experience than maybe my age shows.
Yeah, no, you used it to motivate you, right? You used it to kind of kick it into another gear, and it's like, well, I'll show everybody, I'll show them what I'm really capable of. So that's excellent. And I think age is one of those that all of us can find ourselves guilty of doing that, right? And what's interesting is the younger people are, we make some assumptions, and then the older people we make some assumptions, right? So there's like this sweet spot in the middle where you're just accepted, right? But if you're young or you're old, people make assumptions about what that means, and it couldn't be further from the truth. True's got a great story, had he shared it, about a time that he went to Best Buy and needed some help on his computer, right? And so he went to the Geek Squad, and there was an older female there behind the desk, and True thought to himself, what's this lady's older than me? What's she going to tell? She tore it up. She got in that computer and got after it and just keystroke, and had everything fixed in a matter of moments, right? But because she was older, True made some assumptions about what that meant about her technological prowess. And it had nothing to do with it. Her age had nothing to do with it. So that's kind of the other end of the spectrum of the example that you shared, which I find really, really interesting. So I don't know where the middle is. I don't know where that sweet spot is. I don't know if I'm out of it already. I feel like if I'm not out of it, I'm getting really close to being out of it. So I better enjoy it while I got it. But that's a really good example. And I think we all kind of make that mistake on either one or probably both of those ends of the spectrum. So thanks for sharing that, Ken. Anybody else want to share? Maybe one more. Yes, Commissioner Garner.
I'll follow up with Skippy.
Yeah.
As a woman in politics, I get single storied a lot. And I think one of the big ones was that I had to cheat to be elected. And the second one is that I have to be unhappy at home and with my marriage to want to be in the public eye. There's all sorts of misogynistic things that go along with being a woman in the public realm.
Yeah, absolutely. And so why can you hazard any guess why that is? Why is it that you deal with that and your male counterparts perhaps do not?
Mostly because I'm outspoken in what I believe. Right. And I guess that's not, for my generation, that's common among women, but I guess for other generations, it's not. Right.
Well, and what's interesting is, and I see a parallel there, right? Because in law enforcement, we are predominantly male, right? And specifically white male. And we have only about 12% of the population of law enforcement officers in this country are female. So it's a very, very low percentage. And I can tell you, every single female officer I know has had those experiences where it is, there are things that are laid upon them that none of their male counterparts have to deal with. It's a completely different world. Growing up as a young female police officer in the profession is completely different than a young male officer grows up in the profession, right? And so it's a reality that you face because of your gender. And so that's a really good example. And again, it's just another way that I think is pretty darn common in our world for these bad traits of single-storying people to manifest themselves. So, I think the single story is very akin to implicit bias. I think they're very much related. People make assumptions about people because they're female, right? Because of their biases. People make assumptions about people because they're young, because of their biases. People make assumptions about people because of the way they talk, because of their biases, right? And all of us have biases, right? Every single one of us, every person on this screen has biases. It's just a part of the human condition. But what is important is not that you have bias. It's what you do with the realization that you have bias, right? That's where the rubber meets the road, because you have it. We just do. It's just, it doesn't make you a bad person. And so often, I think people feel like it's a condemnation of them if they have a bias or they have implicit bias, right? But it's not. It doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you the result of your environment, where you grew up, when you grew up, who you grew up around, where, all of those things, the media that you consume, the social media, the movies, the television, Hollywood, all of those things build into your biases and the way you view the world, right? Your historical perspective, your experiences, all of that. What's important is how you recognize when that happens. And I think that's one of the great lessons when we explore the danger of a single story, is that we recognize that we maybe do that, right? That perhaps we do that. And now let me be aware of that going forward, so that when I find myself in that situation, when I find myself looking at guys with gnarly neck tats, right? When I find myself looking at guys, well, I've never seen anybody else with a dreaded beard. That's the only time I've ever seen that. But if I see that again, right, that's a lesson to me. Don't assign value based on something like that, right? Because it might be that it couldn't be further from who they are, right? And I've had other examples of that too, that where I've experienced that in life and met people that had the gnarly neck tats and the different hairstyles that are outside of what you typically see, right? The norm, whatever the norm is, right? And so we just have to be aware of it. We have to recognize that happens in our mind. And now let's decide to do something different with that, because we recognize that happens. And so I think that's why this single story concept is so important, that we recognize and talk about and spend a little bit of time. So thank you guys for sharing your experiences. And I want to give it back to True, because I know we're getting close to time. And we do want to respect everybody's time and get out on time. So True, I kick it back over to you.
Thanks, Chief. I appreciate that. And I'll start the kind of conclusion process and just kind of by way of recap, share some of the things that we discussed today that we can offer as key takeaways. And, we talked about the importance of listening to understand and not listening to reply. Valuable tool to help be an effective bridge builder. We talked about the importance of seeking first to understand before being understood. And that helps to really develop and exercise those empathy muscles, hearing other people's stories. We talked about the importance of not allowing your primary source of information about people that don't look like you to only come from people that look like you. Right? Again, trusted information source versus a credible information source. And so in closing, we want to offer you this final tool, if you will, this tool to help you engage diverse communities. And it's really rooted, I should say, in the principle of meeting people where they are. And we call this our 4-step meet model, or a model for engaging diverse communities. And oftentimes when we say meet people where they are, I think what people really do is they're willing to meet people where they think they should be, or willing to meet people where we want them to be. But to be truly effective in engaging diverse communities, it requires a willingness to meet people where they are, because we're all at different points on our journey. And so this model for engaging diverse communities, this 4-step meet model, has been broken down into an acronym where M teaches us to make the time to engage. We have to make the time to engage. I know we are all extremely busy, and a lot of times bandwidth can be an issue. But I have learned this The temporary sting of inconvenience that comes from making the time to engage with others, people that are different than us, pales in comparison to the consequences that we can experience if we don't. Simply making the time to engage with others to get a better understanding of who they are, how they feel, and why they feel the way that they do. And once we make that time to engage, let's explore the similarities and the differences and know that it is okay that there are differences. We're not going to harp on the differences. We're not going to allow them to become barriers. We're going to use them to build bridges, to leverage that collective intelligence, that collective experience, to co-create and collaborate on how we can all better coexist. Remembering that the diversity is a gift that's available to us all, but inclusion, that's the battery that powers the gift. So recognizing that it's okay that there are differences, but while we're exploring similarities and differences, realizing that in the similarities that there is much more that connects us than we should ever allow to separate us. And then that next E is encourage respect. Let's be respectful of other people's life experiences, their realities that are different than ours, their beliefs and behaviors that are different than ours, and not be dismissive or disrespectful of other people's experiences in life simply because they are not our own. Some things may sound far-fetched to you, but it's disrespectful to invalidate other people's feelings simply because you haven't gone through the same thing. And then finally, the T is take responsibility. And I'm sure every single person on this feed wants to contribute to the solutions of engaging diverse communities in a very mindful way. But part of that is taking the time to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, am I doing or saying anything that could possibly be contributing to the problem? And being honest with ourselves and being willing to course correct if we are. I know for me, over 7 years ago, when I was in that barbershop talking trash about the Cary PD, as much as I wanted to believe I was contributing to the solution and sharing and saying things that I thought would help protect the men and women in that barbershop in that community from some of the hurt and harm that I had experienced, I had to be honest with myself and accept the fact that I was actually contributing to the problem. I was planting seeds of division in the hearts and minds of those men and women. And so I had to take responsibility for that, own up to that. But I am grateful that I've been afforded the opportunity to course correct and now dedicate my life to being a bridge builder. But it required me to take responsibility to do that. And so we'll leave you with this. After you meet people where they are, the next step behind that would be to love people where they are. And we won't always love where they are, but it's incumbent upon us to love the person where they are. And when I say love, I don't mean how you feel, not eros love. I'm talking agape love, a choice, a decision to be patient, to be kind, to be compassionate. And once you've done the first two of meeting them where they are and loving them where they are, we're much better positioned to lead them where they need to go. And so those are our final takeaways for you all today. And again, we thank you all for the gift of your time. We know it's been a long, evening for you all after you've already had a long day, but it's also, it also speaks volumes as to who you are and where your hearts are. And so thank you all for your time. We hope you got as much out of this as we did. And if there's any way that we can work with you and help you and support you in your efforts moving forward, please do not hesitate to reach out.
Thank you.
No, thank you all. And so, Mayor, we'll turn it over to you if you have any closing comments.
No, Drew, I just appreciate you and the Chief coming and sharing your story with us. And I hope that each of us will have learned at least a thing or two from tonight's experience that we'll take forward to make Matthews a better place. And I think we can do that. Would anybody else like to share final comment? Dave Bland, I know you're a lawyer. You got to have something to say.
Summary.
I thought it was very helpful, and I felt I got a lot out of it. I made myself think about things I hadn't thought about before, and I thought we had some good interactions with everybody. I thought it was a good, positive experience, and I thank you guys for helping us through it.
It's the best training I've ever been through. And Whitley, you may be in the barbershop and church, but you'll only find Urban in church. You belong here.
Yeah, I want to thank you too. I'm on my 5th year, getting ready to go into 6 years as a commissioner. And, True, you just close on two of the things that I hold dear. And in the spirit of love and agape love, it's loving people for where they are, who they are in spite of. But at the same time, looking to believe and hope that we can always do better. We can always do better. There's room to do better. And I'm part of this team, and I'm here to see it do better. And I just believe in each one of my fellow commissioners. I know them all personally. It's not just, and we have a relationship because in past times we've been off to meetings together and we broke bread together and we rode together and slept in the same room together. And we had good night conversations and I just know that this town is waiting to explode to lead an example for others. I know me and Pastor Chuck, we partnered with that 5 years ago to do that, to make sure that the religious faith-based churches are leading the way. And Trent, we have a thing twice a year, bridge building, one at my church and one at the White Church, and we rotate in August at my church and February at the other churches. But we brought 3 other churches in the center of town just to make it better and talk more about it. And I truly believe the more we talk, the better we get. And thank you, Chief, and congratulations on your retirement. Thank you for your service. And I know you're doing a great job in assistant, but enjoy your retirement. And thank you, True, for being a part of this as well, too.
Thank you.
I'd like to say one final thing. Does anybody else want to share anything before I have my final comment? I'm particularly proud, and maybe Chief and True aren't aware, but we have by Matthew standards, a pretty diverse board as far as age, political ideologies, male, female, black, white. Our town in the past has been mostly run by white-haired, older white gentlemen like myself. But I think we've really done pretty well as a board. To be so disparate, most of our votes are unanimous on most important issues. So I think we've done a good job. We've got a ways to go, but I just like to say I appreciate the board that we have and how well we work together, even though we have very different viewpoints on many things. But I think overall we're respectful of one another and we work well together. So that's half the battle. So thank you to the board, and that's all I've got. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for leading us tonight, and we'll keep in mind the things that you said as we move forward.
Thank you all. You all have a good night. And Tanya, thank you for inviting us to participate. Thank you.
And I'd like to note it's exactly 9:30. So good job, 9:31.
Beautiful.
Mayor, you need to take a vote to close the meeting.
Serious?
That's what Lori told me.
All right. Who would like to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I think that was seconded by everybody, wasn't it? Motion by Mr. Miller, second by Commissioner McCool. Take a roll call vote. Commissioner Bland.
Yes.
Commissioner Whitley.
Can I see that video? No, I just missed it.
No, you can't. Commissioner
Yes.
Pro Tem Garner,
Yes.
Commissioner McCool,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller.
Yes. Thank you.
I vote yes as well. We are in adjournment. Thank you and good night.